Okay, I think this is working. I feel like an old man who doesn't know what he's doing. Let me move out of this. I hope you can all hear me. But so pardon me, I'm probably going to spend the first few minutes making sure that I'm doing this right. Rotate device, okay. Uh, that's a thing. Let me see. What's this? Show, chat, none, hide all. Chat messages, show. Yeah, sure, show. No, don't want any of those. Share, mute microphone. Okay, well, oh wow, okay, so there's 11 people, 3 of you have already liked it. I assume that this is recording then. I I hope so. Pardon me while I try to figure this out. Let me know if you can't hear me. Oh, crap. Sorry. Okay. I think we're good. I think we're good. I just need to see if I can see it on. It's not seeing chat. Okay, well, um, just checking a thing here. Oh, hello. Hello, can you hear me? Please put in the chat if you can or can't hear me, or if there's any problems with seeing me. Because I am. Yes? Okay. Cool. This is. Okay, cool. That's good. Wow, you all jumped on. Well, hello. Hello, everybody. This is the first time I'm doing this, so thank you for your patience. And welcome to the question answer. Now I know that I am. Hello. Hi. So this'll be interesting. Let me head into the thing right here. Now let me turn that off. And all right, and I have the questions here. So the reason that I wanted to do this in the way that I did, where I had you ask the questions beforehand, is so that I could look over them before, but everything, I wanted to do it in a live stream format because it's a little more personal, and also because I am answering all of this off the cuff, even though I've had the questions beforehand, just because it makes it a little bit easier for me, not quite as nervous, and I'm going to do my best here. So my plan is to stay on as long as it takes to get through. I have 50 comments, and I believe almost all of those are questions. So I'm going to stay on. Oh, hello. Sorry, I'll probably get distracted. Okay. But I'm just gonna go through and answer them. Let me know if I'm doing this correctly. I tried to watch some people who have done this sort of thing before, but I'll be doing my best. So I'm just going to go down through the list of questions, and that we have here. So I'm going to read them out, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. So thank you, by the way, so much for tuning in, and for all of the questions. And it's good to connect with you guys this way. So thank you. So let's see. First question, and I'm just going to go through how they are lined up, is from Colleen I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your names. Colleen Kavanagh, if you're there, hello to you. And oh yes, this question's tooting my horn, as it were. What's up, Michael? Can you give any advice on formulating arguments? Oh, hey, Beef Lummy. Sorry. Can you give any advice on formulating arguments, speaking, just communicating your very profound thoughts in general? You are a master in the art of articulation, and it's something I really want to improve on because it's such a powerful tool. Thanks, dude. Thanks to you. I am very flattered that you think I am articulate. I feel slightly awkward answering a question that is so flattering to me, but I'll do my best. So can you give any advice on formulating arguments, speaking, just communicating? And I did think about this a bit before, because this was posted about a week before. And so ironically, I'll see whether or not I can articulate myself so well in answering the question. One of the problems is that I think different personalities. Sorry, just a second. I think different personalities have different methods for doing it. So I always I'm always trying to be cautious that I'm not trying to teach people how me as a particular INFJ would want to communicate things. But having said that at the beginning, that I don't know whether it will work for you specifically or not. So I mean, so one of the things is I noticed part of the problem is that I tend to do it naturally, at least the way that I communicate. When I was like a kid, I would sorry, I lost my train of thought. You'll need to bear with me. Yes, thank you, Joshua Richardson. Just a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the thing as I get used to this, so I'll try to stop apologizing so much. But part of it is obviously that I'm writing script, so I honestly think that I'm better at writing than I am at speaking. But when I'm writing, usually what I'm doing is I isolate what it is that I want to say, and then I need to put it into the words. It really is just something that I do naturally. I guess part of the problem is, as I'm thinking about this now, is the presumption at the beginning is that I am actually good at articulating, and I'm not entirely sure if that is the case, or in what way that is the case. People tell me that that is the case, and I guess they're talking about that moment when, yeah, exactly. From the comments, I think for INFJs, it's very much like because you have that transfer from the contextual part to the universal. So I have these ideas, and the ideas begin as non-linguistic, essentially. They begin as just perceptions from a context, and you have to put them into words. And so it can be, for me anyway, I'm trying very hard to I feel bad. I think I'm going to, oh, I feel so bad about this. I think I'm going to, I think I'm going to have to at least periodically mute the chat, because my mind is having trouble focusing on several things at once, and it's throwing me off. So I feel bad about that. I'm going to turn it on to check what's going on, but it's throwing me off, and I don't want to take an hour on each question, or this will never get done. So don't feel bad. I would love to be able to read them, and I am going to turn it on every once in a while, but I'm noticing that it's making it hard for me to answer. But I'm flattered. And hello, Daniel Garcia. I'm so sorry. It's not. Yes, sorry. So ironically, in my attempt to answer the question in articulation, I don't think I'm articulating myself very well. I articulate better when I'm alone, ironically. So maybe I just need to convince myself that maybe I would do better if it weren't on a live stream, but I'm determined to do this. But you were asking for advice on how to formulate arguments, so let me try to do that. Advice I would give would maybe be, Because for me, I do a lot of my stuff in writing, and so I'm better with that. So with the writing, what I'm always trying to do is uh, I need I strive to write so that when I read over it again, I can make it so that I communicate the thought as honestly and purely as possible. I don't like to simplify, because that feels like falsification to me, and I don't think that simplification is the same thing as expressing something clearly. There's that wonderful quote from Wittgenstein where he says that whatever can be said clearly, and what can't be said clearly, we should be silent about. But that first part of it, I really, really connect with that because I do believe that. I think that if you think about it enough and you're careful enough when you're trying to communicate what you want to say, and if you can isolate what that kernel is and focus on what the kernel is that you want to say, um, and then figure out what is the best way to translate that using the words at your disposal so that the audience can pick up on it with the least amount of effort possible. So part of that is part of the translation process is you have to have some kind of an attunement to your audience to be able to make the proper compromise between the kernel that you understand intuitively versus the fact that they don't understand it and you're trying to translate it. I should point out that this way of thinking about it, I believe, is actually a very INFJ, and not just INFJ, but part of that quadra with the STPs and the NFJs. I think that it is very much their way of thinking about it because you have this motion from this contextual realm where you have these ideas that are intuitive and are very much from your own context, and you're trying to make it so that they can be understood regardless of context. And so there's this translation. I think that's especially how it is for INFJ, at least that's how it is for me. So, I mean, if you're more like me, then my advice would be to, because I don't think that NE is like that. Because I've noticed that when I've read books that I believe are, I'm trying to think of an example, but there's a lot of more popular books out that very often I really struggle to read a lot of the more popular nonfiction that's out right now because, in my opinion, they don't get to the point. They partly because I'll read the title of the work. I'm trying to think of like I have well, no, that's not a good example, but like it'll be a title like why do here's a good one, that one book, why do good people disagree, or something to that effect. And it asks that question, that's the title, and it catches your interest. And then I go in and I'm like, okay, and then I read the book, and it's like, from my perspective, you could answer that question. The way that I would want to write that book is literally first page in bold. I would say, here is the answer in one sentence in conciseness. The rest of the book would be simply unpacking whatever is necessary to unpack to understand that statement. But I think that's a very INFJ way of doing it. The NE likes to, because the NE doesn't, if I'm correct, it doesn't like to isolate, it doesn't do this internal isolation of the intuition. It's trying to approach all of the external intuitions out there. It doesn't want to isolate something in here because that seems arbitrary. They're trying to approach, and so they go all the way around. But from my perspective, it feels very frustratingly unfocused because it's like, I just want to know what your point is. I need to know your point, and what you do is you progress from point to point. That's one of the problems I've had when reading Foucault, actually, is, and I haven't read a whole lot of Foucault, but the amount that I have read, it's like I really want to understand because I know there's some very, very interesting ideas that I want to engage with, but I struggle because I can't figure out what his points are because it's like he flitters around ever officially saying anything, and he is going along, and it's like you're supposed to build up to a conclusion, and it's never clear that he's doing that. And that might just be me and my weird perception of it. So let me open up the chat, and oh, good heavens. Point FJ, do you use any type of writing techniques, proprioceptive stream of consciousness, etc.? I don't think so. Well, I mean, I use stream of consciousness when like writing in my journal or diary or so forth. But and so yeah, I'll kind of do that. But when I'm writing like for my channel, it's all about trying to communicate the point as concisely as possible. Probably conciseness is, and I think some people don't like that as much. I think because they find it very, very dense, and it is. But I want it all very well organized and focused on what is being said. So, ironically, though, I don't know if I've really answered the question, because I don't know if I have any sure advice, because I just sort of do it naturally. Trying to think if there's anything else I could say about it. Well, I'll answer just a couple of questions on the side, and I may not be doing that a whole lot in the live stream, because I'm going to try to focus on the questions that were posted. But oh, and hello, Teton. It's good to hear from you again. Sorry I dropped off the face of the earth. And I secretly am going to apologize and feel bad about having, in my opinion, feeling like I've done that to people who I've talked with before. Maybe I shouldn't talk about that. Anyway, when are you going to talk about Jordan? Oh, don't worry. I'll talk about Jordan Peterson. Because I believe there was a question or two, or even if I was mistaken about that, I'm still going to end up talking about it, because that is a hot topic, and I think it's worth mentioning. Do you ever do monologues? Oh, you have no idea. They are always, well, I've done my ranting videos where I monologued and I guess I'm sort of monologuing now, but I monologue all the time to myself. Something will happen and my mind will start spinning with all these different ideas, and I have to pace back and forth either in the yard or out at like a public park or something, but preferably someplace where I can speak out loud, because that makes it a lot easier for me to encode what those intuitions are and dispel the fog that often is in your head. I do that by setting it down in clear language. So I actually find that very, very therapeutic. I've noticed that, I don't know if it's all of them, but I have noticed that ENFPs have a somewhat similar thing. I think everybody does in their own way, but I've noticed ENFPs have that, but they don't like to talk to themselves. They want to talk with another person, and they need that actual physical person. Whereas for me, that almost sometimes is problematic, because the other person, I feel bad saying this, but the other person will actually talk back, and or will interrupt because they also have ideas, and it's like, but I'm trying to talk, this is me time. And it's like, so it's very different, and it's important for me to talk with another person to bounce the ideas off. But one more thing, this is a bit off topic, but do you have any advice on maintaining social relations in the workplace? Oh, sorry. Let me, maintaining social relations in the workplace. You can probably tell from my stunned silence that I'm having trouble, because I don't know. I mean, part of the problem is that when it comes to like ethics, or like what you actually do once you know what the types are, I don't know how much help I can be there, because a lot of it, in my opinion, comes down to knowing what the types are is more of assisting you in being able to do the ethics you already have better. So, for instance, I mean, the things that you should do to help maintain order or harmony in a workplace would be principles of charity and hope, especially charity. You care about other people. But more than that, you have to have a genuine sense of compassion and care for these other people. And what typology helps with is that you can have a genuine compassion for other people, but the trouble is that you may not know how to properly express that for another person. And so, if you have the tools of typology and then you combine that with observing how the actual person operates, it can be I think it can be very, or I've found anyway, that it can be very, very useful for, at the very least, understanding that it's okay that another person, like a great example with my own family was that, and I've talked about this before, but one of my siblings is an ISFP, and he's the only one in the family, in my view, who operates on the TE-FI axis. Everybody else is FETI, and I think it was only after, as I started studying typology, that I began to realize that that was a way to explain what was happening, and why there had been so much trouble before, because literally especially with my mom, she was expecting to see more external shows of emotion, and because that's how she orients herself, that's how she knows what she's doing is actually helping. But for him, his emotional expressions were not naturally lined up with anything external. He just didn't even think in that way, and so she would be anxious and or frustrated, or a number of different emotions, because she didn't know. She assumed that she must be doing something wrong because he wasn't responding in the way that she assumed, and it was only after learning that, some people don't show the emotion. So really, you need to also be sincere in that FI way, at least in his case, and not worry so much about that, and just say what you're thinking and let him receive it. And it's not, note that these aren't like hard and fast rules, because it depends on the person when you meet them and you see how they express these functions. But knowing that the fact that he doesn't express the emotions in that way, is not wrong, and that it has its advantages, and that you can learn to work with it. So we're already almost a half hour in, and I have only addressed one of the questions, and I don't know if I did a very good job with it. So just, so just so you know, and I feel bad, but I'm gonna have to. I'm not going to be able to address questions in the chat. I apologize for that, because I did say that I was going to address the questions that were underneath the comments. Maybe I'll go back through the chat if there's time, but at the rate I'm going now, I don't know if there will be. So I'm terribly sorry. But now that I know that people will come on and post questions in the chat, then in the future I may very well just say, hey, I'll be on. Feel free to come on and just ask your questions in the chat in the future. But before I move on, let me just see what was there. Oh, good. Yeah, you already started figuring it out, because there wasn't a whole lot. Well, here, I'll answer these last two questions in the chat, but after that I'm going to focus on the comments on the one video. I liked your Model A video, but folk aren't using it to analyze further. What is the intrinsic value of Model A, in your opinion? This is a socionics question. Let me bring that up again. Aren't using it to analyze further. What is the intrinsic value of Model A, in your opinion? Maybe I shouldn't have tried this question. My apologies. The only reason that I'm trying to figure it out is because I wouldn't describe myself as being I don't know, I still don't know as much about socionics or the comparing Model A with other models. So to be honest, Model A in socionics is the only model that I've really come to know, so I don't really have any point of comparison. So I don't know if I can really answer that one. Sorry. Um, the only other one was ethics is a social demonstration, right? Well, that goes into what I was saying before. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. Oh. I get what you're saying. Sorry. So the benefit of an eight function model, right? The benefit of an eight function model is that it addresses a person's attitude, or at least what their typical attitude would be towards all four of the function axes. So it becomes not so much a question of, at least this is how I think of it. I know that many other people think of it with the eight function model as it's eight separate blocks, or eight separate functions in four blocks, and the terminology that's used is that you have these functions almost as though you possess them and you sort of use them. And that's a helpful or simple way of putting it. The benefit of that is that it talks about how you approach different sort of aspects of life that are colored by the different functions, and doesn't just kind of gloss over it in silence. So I could look at it and see, okay, this is how I would likely react to NESI or just SI in general. I have found it useful. I've talked a bit about my relationship with TE. But the way that I prefer to think of it is that I prefer to operate along these two axes, and I don't like these other two axes, and they clash with each other. Okay, I'm going to move on with the actual questions on the comments of the video. So the next one, and this one I've also thought a lot about, and there's several questions that are kind of related to, but are you familiar with CognitiveType, Vultology, and what they call adaptive and directive extroverted feeling? What is your take on it? I'll answer the second part first, because I actually went ahead and was looking around through CognitiveType.com, Vultology. For those of you who don't know what that is, by the way, I've talked about it a bit before. I'm familiar with Juan Sandoval. I helped. I want to say it wasn't like peer review, but I went over and helped him out a little bit with his book, Cognitive Types. I will show you. Look, behold, a cognitive type. Great little, well, it's not a little book, but it's a great book. It's got great stuff. It is my advertisement for Juan Sandoval because I like him and stuff. But anyway, his take is he's trying to be very scientific, rational, reasonable about the science of microexpressions or facial expressions as a way to objectively penetrate into consciousness. So it's a little. I don't know if he would say it this way, but in my view, it's a little bit of what Myers was doing with Jung, where Myers was like, okay, you've got these great ideas, but is there a way that we can try to make this more objective, and so that we can help to determine things a bit more clearly? It's a classic question that a lot of typologists have been struggling with. It shows up all the time with, I don't know what type I am, right? And that's what people complain about a lot. And I'll be talking about DaveSuperPowers in a bit too, because there's a question actually right after this, and he's trying to do a similar thing. And the notion, if I'm understanding right, is to try to isolate certain external criteria or objective criteria that you can then measure objectively, so that there is an argument, you are indeed seeing such and such external indications. And if you can demonstrate that there is a necessary connection between this external indicator and this internal conscious process, then if you see the external indicator, you know that the process is happening. So with Vultology, depending on not just facial expressions, but also body language, or vocal tone, or things that happen unconsciously, for all intents and purposes, we're not thinking about it, so it's not subject to, it's an unintentional side effect of your internal processes. So NI, for instance, one of the things with NI is the NI stare that Juan Sandoval talks about or theorizes, is that is a good external indicator, that NI will stare very focusedly into the distance. This is his theory, and I'm butchering it. Sorry, but that that it'll ramble on as it's trying to figure out and present this idea, and I do this a lot. So there's these things, these little behaviors that are meant to act as a reliable indicator of an internal conscious process. So that's what Vultology is. It's about facial expressions, the algorithm of human consciousness as revealed via facial expressions, but also some body language. This is also what INTJ, INFP Coffee are very interested in doing, and they've made some videos on that. So anyway, but the specific question was, am I familiar with what they call adaptive and directive extroverted feeling? And I did look this up a bit, though I think it's kind of, well, it's not self-explanatory. I mean, to me, it was a bit, but I think it's so if I understand it right, adaptive extroverted feeling is the expression, from Juan Sandoval's view, it's the expression of FE that is, I want to say what people normally think of when they think of FE, or at least what I think of, which is being accommodating and being adaptive and sort of molding yourself around the person and giving them a very nice hug and baking them cookies and stuff. I'm being facetious, but it's the very warm, more receptive, accommodating FE, whereas directive is where it's like, I want everybody into the group. I'm going to help organize this large group of people, but I'm doing it not in a TE way where it's all about efficiency. I'm doing it so that everybody is involved, or you're saying, I need you to be able to tell me this thing so I can help you. A lot of their ENFJs, I think, are much more known for that, and I think that's a part of NI. I knew one ENFJ who was very assertive, but they were still an ENFJ because they were not efficient-minded. They were pragmatic, but that was because they were trying to include everybody into the group and also do things in that they had that universal judgment I've talked about with FETI, where it's like we need everything to be fair and to include everybody. So, I mean, as you can tell from my talking about it, I think it's a totally useful distinction to make. I think it's definitely, it pins down something that I struggled with in talking about FE, is because when originally talking about it, I focused a lot more on or in my mind anyway, I focused on the accommodative, but I also knew from its structure it should also be directive, but I didn't feel like I'd seen that. And then over the years, as I've made more videos, I've tried to balance those two aspects of it, or expressions of it. But as for, I'll go ahead and, because I know that there's people who are curious what I think about Vultology and CognitiveType. I think that, like what I had been saying before, it's not something that I'm doing, but all power to them. I think they are being very smart about it. I'm most familiar with Juan Sandoval, and I've read through, and he's a sharp guy. He does a good job codifying concisely a lot of the principles and of typology, and he understands them well. And I haven't studied or learned his system well enough to be able to give any kind of a fair any kind of a fair critique of the methods or his work at this point. I can't. I think that he hits on a lot of. He's very perceptive. I think he's hit on looking at NI and also FE. I think he's hit on some things, but I haven't studied facial expressions enough to know. Like I said before, I kind of view it probably somewhat pretentiously, actually, but I feel like I'm sort of playing, or I play more of the role of that Jung did, and the facial typing, especially from Juan Sandoval, is more of the Myers. That's not a perfect comparison, but all I mean by that is that with Jung, he was very focused on describing the internal cognition. He didn't branch out into what Sandoval is doing, which is trying to isolate specific external things that you can then measure and then determine with some greater objectivity. Carl Jung was always in the subjective realm. And that's kind of how I've always approached it. And that's what's always interested me. The thing that I find most important and most interesting about typology is how it's helped me with understanding philosophy. I think that it's very connected with, or I find it to be very intertwined with philosophy. And there's a wonderful passage in Nietzsche that sums this up. I wonder if I can actually... I'm afraid to take the time to try to find it, but I can pretty much just paraphrase it here, where there's a number of passages in the first chapter or first section of Beyond Good and Evil. It's the section called On the Prejudices of Philosophers, and there's a number of sections in there that are brilliant and I think definitely influenced Jung in his work on the notion of psychological types, because Nietzsche talks about how in his view, I don't know if he said it precisely this way, but there are a limited number of psychological attitudes, and the philosophers they're not coming up with anything new per se, but they're continually just orbiting, or they're discovering orbits that fit their own personality better. And I'm not that radical about it, but I think he's really onto something, and that is how I tend to think about it, is that I look at philosophers, and I'm always curious to see how their philosophy comes from their position, not as like to invalidate it, because it doesn't invalidate it. It's still useful, but that helps me a great deal in understanding it. For instance, in the Derrida video that I did, I didn't talk about type at all, because I didn't want to get those two mixed up. I wanted to focus on talking about Derrida. But if you watch that video, his philosophy is very, very, it's very describable, you could say, by the ENFP and by the function axes that the ENFP embodies in the way, because the Derrida is focused on allowing yourself to remain open to all possibilities that surround the object. And his whole notion of the metaphysics of presence, I take to be essentially a critique of SE and NI. Because, like I was saying before, with how I try to articulate myself, it's very much in I focus in on what it is that I want to say, and I then translate it for people to read or into the medium. But it's that focusing on this is the truth, and this is the thing I want to say. This is the thing I'm seeing. And Derrida finds that I want to say actually dangerous, because in his point of view, that's intentionally putting on blinders, right, and not seeing these other possibilities. And that's why I think more NE-oriented books tend to do more of a this thing, and they feel much more comfortable when they feel like you've addressed all of the different possibilities that crop up, rather than sort of narrowing in and dismissing and setting aside and excluding down to, no, this is the course we're following. If you read Aristotle, it's interesting because I agree with IDRLabs that he is an ENTJ, or at least a TE dominant type, and he's very very good, because he forces himself to address different different possibilities. But when you go through Aristotle, he's very exclusive. He brings up a possibility, and then he says within just a couple of paragraphs, but this is why that's wrong, and here's this is what they say, but this is why that's wrong. And so he narrows it down very quickly. Whereas with NE, they don't do, if I'm right, they don't do the narrowing down at all or so quickly. Anyway, I'm off topic, ironically. So yeah, and I want to say this too. So I find it very useful for discussing philosophies and understanding, to some degree, understanding contemporary events, and that's obviously a very Carl Jungish sort of thing to do. I was reading through Psychological Types. That's what he does, not just in that chapter 10 section, but all the way back through all of the previous sections, because Psychological Types is a thick book. But most of it, you don't need to read everything to understand the typology part. I think that really just the great starting point is that chapter 10. Even though Jung himself was he preferred the beginning part, but the beginning part is mainly him talking about philosophy and running through history very, very sporadically. I don't even want to say that he's running through history. He is in that first chapter, but then he starts talking about Schiller. He has a whole... Anyway, sorry. You need to look it up for yourself. But it is very interesting because he's trying to point out and show how these different important figures demonstrate extroversion or introversion, and also some of the functions in these general ways, and how that helps to explain their clashes and also their psychology. And that's what I tend to do naturally. That's how it's sort of the point where typology really took off for me was not the use of it for that it wasn't focused on the use of it in like everyday life, even though I think it can be very useful for that. That's just not what I tend to focus on. I tend to focus on, I was reading Emerson or actually I think it was Thoreau. This was years and years ago before I started making videos, and I was reading Thoreau and I was just getting really frustrated with him because in my mind I was like, he seemed so naive to me at that time. But I really wanted to like him because he wrote so beautifully, and I, at the same time, liked his ideas, but at the moment I was feeling sort of irritable, and I was frustrated because it seemed so naive to me that you would say everybody should just be themselves, and everyone should go to the pace of their own drummer, and these sorts of things. And I was reading it and I was like, yeah, but then like no one will be able to work together to get anything done. And also, what if I like want to kill people? Like, you're not saying, because I'm very Dostoevsky like. because Dostoevsky, especially in Crime and Punishment, his whole idea in there is about there's an end passage at the very end of the book where he talks about this. He has this horrible dream where there's this virus, and the virus infects people, and it's like a neurological virus. And what it does is it makes it so basically everyone becomes a solipsist, essentially, or a moral solipsist, where they think that they possess the truth, no one else does. They're the only one who's right, and they're the only one whose truth matters. And as a result, no one's able to coordinate any efforts, and also people start killing each other and burning villages and things because they think that they're right, and so basically everyone becomes, in a sense, everyone becomes a terrorist for their own cause because they're not regarding other people. That is how FETI, and especially, I think at least the FETI, that's how they think. They're like, because they orient themselves via what other people's values are and by forming compromises. And whereas the TEFI vision is, no, I don't want to orient myself by these other people's values. I need to understand what my values are, because that's what's really going to orient me. Anyway, I've gotten off topic, but the point is that that's a very important, that, if anything, is a very important philosophical distinction. Because once that clicked for me and I realized, oh, that's where Thoreau's coming from, then I was able to appreciate him more, because I didn't feel like I was able to, in a weird way, it's almost like I could give him a pass. I was like, okay, I don't agree with him on this, but really it comes down to this typological difference. And I need to appreciate more what he's saying given his psychology, and I can still draw insights from this and be more comprehensive. So anyway, what was even the original question? It was the cognitive type question. So a lot of what I just said didn't have to do strictly with cognitive type, but and there's a couple more questions, so I'll set that to the side for now. The next question is, hi Michael, do you know the YouTube channel DaveSuperPowers? I do. If you do, which I do, they recently started posting typology-related videos after a long break, and they're about a new objective scientific approach to typing people. What do you think about this new approach? And yay first! Well, yay for you. I wish I could give you a prize. Sorry, that sounded sarcastic. I didn't mean it like that. Sorry. Oh, and also this is Usmax. Anyway, yes, I do know of DaveSuperPowers. I actually believe that DaveSuperPowers sent me an email at one point, and I never responded. And this is my apology if DaveSuperPowers happens to watch this, that I did not respond. I've been trying to handle a lot of different things, and you're not the only person. Maybe I don't know. I just feel bad about that whenever that happens. Anyway, what do I think? Because I actually, reading this comment, I had... So actually, and before I started making videos, I came in, I think, when EJ R&D was I think, removing himself from YouTube. I might have come in before then, because I want to say that I saw a video or two of his, but I also saw some of DaveSuperPowers' videos, and I always remember appreciating his clarity, though I did not appreciate his abrasiveness or his sense of humor. I'm sure I'm not alone in that, but, you know, whatever. But I do still, and then I remember him taking a break, like you said, and now he's started making videos again. I've looked at some of them, and as always, I appreciate his clarity. I appreciate the fact that he makes it very clear what the point is. I think he also, like Juan Sandoval, he understands that notion of, in his channel trailer, he does a good job of explaining some of the to help you to understand why there's this trouble between typology and the, quote, scientific community, or more scientific community. And you can watch that video for yourself. I think it's a good view, but it comes down to he's trying to make it more scientific, and basically what that means is you are trying to specify and locate and pin down in clear language, and most importantly in a way that you can be sure that other people will agree with you on it. You're trying to pin down what are these functions, because it's no good if it's just intuitive fluff in your head. That's for science anyway, because for science you're basically trying to make it so that you can, in order to prove something, basically you're making it so that another person cannot be reasonable and reject what you've just shown them. That's the goal, I think, behind proving something, especially proving something scientifically. You're trying to reach into another person, and it's very powerful, but in order to do that with typology, you have to specify very directly and very clearly what are these functions, and most importantly, what are the external criteria which they produce, which we can nail down and say, when we see this, we know that this is the process that's going on. And you codify that and say, this is what it is, and then you can begin objectively going through. I'm probably missing some important aspect of this whole argument, but I'm, like I'd said before, in communicating, I'm focusing in on something and I'm saying that so that it's absolutely clear, but I'm probably forgetting some other aspect, but I'm not sure what it is. So anyway, as far as what I think of them and their scientific approach, I think I am for it. Like I said before, I find myself, so if I'm being honest, I'm conflicted, and the reason I'm conflicted is because I say all power to them, but I'm not very good at that, and I guess I'm kind of taking a back seat with that at this point and just watching to see how these things develop, because they are still relatively new. I guess my instinct, and it's I specifically say instinct because it's not reasons, it's just how I think, or preferences, is that my fear would be, it's that trouble of determining or showing for certain that such and such external criteria really does mean such and such internal conscious state. Because the main problem is the problem of other minds. I can't get into any of your minds and tell you my opinion of this is in fact what is going on. And this happens a lot, and is a problem in psychology, I think, through all of psychology, is this problem of other minds. You can't truly objectively figure out what's going on in another person's mind. You always have to do it indirectly. You have to say, okay, well, you've done this thing, therefore we've determined that means you have this conscious state. But there's always that little bit of wiggle room there where you're not quite sure. I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I think you get the point, though. So anyway, it's that trouble of figuring out. What you're trying to do is in order to make something more scientific, you're trying to make it so that you can be able to definitively say, yes, you do indeed fit into this category because you meet these criteria. But it's just the reason that people get very standoffish with psychology is because you're essentially saying you as a human being fit into this category. This is how your identity itself sort of operates. And so it gets very personal because you have this other person telling you what you're like. And that's why I think a lot of people are afraid of typology. I've talked about these things before, but and that's and like I've said, I'm always trying to I naturally don't put a lot of trust in external indications. I always want to, which is ultimately you have to, you can only you have to talk to people, you have to observe people, and technically all of those things are external indications, but I'm always trying to penetrate deeper. And I don't know if I'm expressing myself very well, but I think that big kind of tangled jumble is probably the best I can do as far as how I think or feel about it. If I had to sum it all up, I'm like, all power to you, I'm standing back to watch, and that's probably not the maybe not the answer you're looking for, but I'm going to continue doing it with my focus, which is I'm interested in the philosophies that these different functions tend to produce in specific people, like Derrida or Kierkegaard, and showing how they compare and contrast, and how people today resonate with these philosophies, whether they realize it's from Derrida or Kierkegaard or not, and how those manifest. So, okay, next question. Could you comment on the four temperaments, choleric, sanguine, etc., and how you think it relates to Jungian typology, and what temperament you consider yourself as and why? This is from TB. Hello, TB. So could I comment on the four temperaments? I can. Whenever I see pairs of four, I get excited because I'm like, I wonder if I can hook these up with all of the pairs of four that are in typology, because the funny thing about pairs of four is I think that's a combination that occurs a lot with human beings, because it's a very useful mathematical concept. Because so long as you have, because it's essentially just it's a binary thing. So you have a yes and you have a no, and then if you have two distinct sets of those, then you can put them like this, and you get dot, 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 dot. You get four categories, and they're a mixture. And you can divide everything up in that way, in this very mathematical way, and that's how typology operates, or that's how I've built it anyway. You have extroversion, introversion. You have sensing, intuition. You have all these twos, and then they combine in logical ways, and they form the eight types, and then those combine in certain, or the eight functions, and those combine in certain ways to form 16 types, and then you can do it further, like CognitiveTypes has striven to do by creating the 64 subtypes, where each individual type then has this ego focus, which is one of their own functions. So for instance, you could have an ESFJ who is more focused on the SI part, and then you can have an ESFJ who's more focused on the FE part. Subtypes, Socionics has talked about that notion too. But anyway, what do I think about the four temperaments, the choleric, the sanguine? It's always a dual thing for me. On the one hand, I'm like, I wonder how this could be seen to relate to the function axes, and then on the other hand, I think to myself whether or not I am changing it too much in order to fit the function axes. So I try to separate and say this is what it is on its own, versus this is a way that this is how it kind of links up. As it stands right now, I don't really have any opinion on how the four temperaments could link up to. So the closest that I have is, and this was a while back, and I have to credit the idea to Heavy Mole, who was a a guy who commented on some of my videos, and gave me some insights into I credit him actually with being the one who first, he gave me a lot of very, very helpful ideas regarding the notion of temperaments or quadras. I keep on referring to them as temperaments because I came up with it separate from socionics, and then I suddenly realized, oh, they did this before me, and I was able to get some insights from them. But anyway, and he had proposed connections between the four elements, the four temperaments, because throughout ancient and medieval philosophy, by the way, you see this pattern of four and this notion that there's four elements, and there are four temperaments that correspond, and those four temperaments have to do with four different parts of the body. And those, if you know anything about playing cards, which are derived more or less from the tarot, which is just the original playing cards, and those have a history too that go back. Those fit into the four suits are meant to correspond to four different social classes, which represent four different elements and so forth. So this is a very long, drawn-out way of saying that, and I'm hopefully I won't butcher this, but choleric goes with fire, sanguine. I want to make sure I get this right. Actually, someone probably has already put it in the chat. Please, oh, sorry, terribly sorry. Just a heads up for anybody who's new in here. For my own sanity, I am only very, very periodically checking the chat because I'm trying to focus on answering the questions that were on the video, and I feel bad about that because it makes it somewhat less personal. But I was noticing at the beginning that my mind, I would see a new chat pop up and it's like, oh, what's going on? So I apologize for that, though I am checking. What I might end up doing is in the future, no, be quiet, Brigham, stop telling me to look at the chat. Brigham's the ENFJ who I interviewed in my video, and he's on the chat. You should check out his channel. I did a D&D thing with him. And now I can't remember what I was saying before, so thanks for that, Brigham. What I was going to say was, what I might do is go through the chat, and any questions that I didn't answer in this video, I might make a follow-up or something like that, because I feel kind of bad, but you don't need to feel bad. Anyway, going back to the four temperaments, I'd had a notion, so I'm going to throw this by you guys here as sort of an answer to the question, that because I was looking at the way that I'm looking at the four quadras of the four temperaments now, and I think that I can, or at least that they can be connected up with the classical groups of four, with the four elements and the four medical temperaments and so forth. But it was specifically through the playing card suits, which are related to the tarot suits. Though it's got to be taken with a grain of salt. But the notion was that given... So you have the SFPs and the NTJs, and both of their function axes, in my view, are describable as contextual. So that's to say, they are they both perceive and judge, or prefer to perceive and judge from their own context, looking out at the world, which I talked about in my axes and quadras video. So they have both of them. So they are sort of the most contextual types. And so I relate them, and I actually have always related to them. I used to use the term royal, but you could also say aristocratic or monarchs, or however you want. Insofar as metaphorically those that conveys the notion that their mind, and I have to be careful with this because I don't mean it literally, I mean it very metaphorically, but they have an aristocratic temperament. Because they want to operate from their own context, and it's not about factoring in all of these other possible contexts or operating outside of a context. Nietzsche is a good example because Nietzsche talks all the time about how you need to be pure to yourself. It's that sort of being true to yourself in the ultimate sense. And the natural result of that is that it can, but not necessarily, but it can result in degrees of solipsism where there's just you in the center and then everything else is always in relations to you. That allows the mind to be very, very efficient because the goal is to have everything aligned up so that what you think is also what you do, and what you do, you know the universe so well that what you do always is effective. That's, I think, a common INTJ. It crops up a lot with INTJ philosophers where they want their will to instantly be affected in the world. That's almost like the unconscious goal. You see that in Marx. You see it in Nietzsche. You see it in degrees with Rand. I think you also see it with Newton to a degree because that's what he was trying to do by laying out his laws of physics. But anyway, so they're aristocratic because they are seeking to take what you could describe as a more commanding psychological attitude. They want to command themselves. They certainly do not like to adhere to a morality that did not originate, or they do not consider to have been built up from themselves, in a sense. They can't act dispassionately, or if they do, they don't like to. The ENTJ may deceive themselves into not realizing, and the ENTJ may technically be acting dispassionately, but in the sense that I'm talking about it, it's not, they are still being motivated by that inferior FI. So anyway, if they link up with this notion of the aristocrat, then they would seem to link up with the element of air, insofar as the element of air is what is associated with the suit of the royalty. So in kind of those strata of society. So they're up there on the top. They formulate their own moralities is sort of the ideal. Below that you have the theocratic temperament, or the clergy, which I think is where the STPs and NFJs fit. And funnily enough, I actually called them saints when I first did the temperaments, and I didn't realize that at first. But the reason I call them that is because they're a mixture, right? So they receive these intuitions that are non-linguistic and are highly personal. So it's almost like you're receiving this revelation from a deity, and then you're trying to figure out how to communicate it to the people who are on the ground. And so you have this notion of trying to lead people up the pyramid of enlightenment so that everybody is united to this one idea at the top. And of course the idea ends up turning out to be the idea that the theocrat had. So that's sort of the prejudice, right? And that's how they operate. That's how I operate. And it's not a bad thing. It could be a bad thing, but how I operate is I'm trying to isolate. This is what the revelation is that I want to communicate to a large group of people, like I'm kind of doing now. I'm trying to explain things. I'm trying to explain it so that other people can understand. And so naturally what I'm doing is you have the four corners of the earth, the four temperaments, the four angles of the pyramid. I sound so much like Jung right now. I'm like, look, conspiracy theories, but just follow with me. You have the four corners of the pyramid, and then they link up via triangles to the tippy top, and that's where they unite. And that's the goal of the INFJ and the NFJs and the STPs. The opposite of that is the next one, which is the merchants. No, so the clergy connects with water, by the way, with the element of water, and that means they would also be phlegmatic, whereas the aristocrats, the SFPs and NTJs, would be sanguine, I believe. Yes, sanguine, because that's air. Though, hopefully I'm getting this right. Yes, I am, because choleric is fire and melancholy is earth. So the the next one down is actually is Earth, so that's the merchants, and that's the STJs and the NFPs. The reason that they're the merchants, in my view, is because they're sort of the opposite of the theocrats. What they're doing is the theocrats want to lead everybody up this pyramid to be united at the top to this idea, whereas the merchants want to basically lead everyone back down from the pyramid. Because when you're up at the pyramid, you're not distinguished from anybody. You're all united. You're this big homogeneous mass. And they don't like that. They don't like the notion of conformity. You see this all the time in NFP. That I believe that a lot of the classic dystopias like Fahrenheit 451 in 1984, they often have this very strong underlying theme of conformity, and of everybody kind of having been, especially in 1984, where everybody's being imposed upon by Big Brother, by this external ideology that wants everybody to believe in the ideology. Kind of like secretly the NFJs and STPs kind of how they operate. They take on that role. They could be evil about it if they wanted to. They certainly don't have to be, but that's how the NFP views it. And what they want to do is they want everybody to be able to differentiate themselves from that original unity, because they see that original unity as, well, it's just one thing, it's one idea, and that's boring. They think that it's not that everybody should be joining up with this one light. It's that everybody should be able to appreciate and express the light that is in themselves. And everybody has it, and everybody has an equal right to it, and it's kind of like a mercantile system. It's like you want a free market of values, or a free market of morals in a sense. You want there to be this free market where everybody has a fair chance. That's where, say, the ESTJs fit into this, because normally we don't think of them as being like these nonconformists or something, but I think technically they are, because they have this notion of everybody is on this level, starts out on this level playing field, and they have equal opportunity to distinguish themselves and to become the best person they can be. That's why they're big on responsibility and that sort of stuff. And it fits nicely with this notion. And I don't mean to carry over the capitalism, I mean it metaphorically, but you have this free market, and they want, don't interfere with me and what I'm deciding to sell. Don't interfere with what that person is selling, even if you don't like it selling, right? And so, and because it's working for them, and just allow to see whether or not it works. But then you have the clergy coming down, the metaphorical clergy coming down and being like, no, this is wrong. There's only, certain things that are right, because that's just naturally how they think. And it's like, there's certain things. Another way to say this and to show the complexity and nuance here is that, you have the NFPs who are like, we want to lead people back down from the pyramid. So to distinguish them, to help them to be, to develop themselves at those different four corners. And, let's say they propose that, everybody's behind that, and then the NFJs come along and they're like, wow, that's such a beautiful idea. How about we start a school, an official school, that will teach people the best way to individuate themselves? And the NFPs are like, no! They might be sort of on board with that, but the idea behind it, that there's like this official way or that there's a best way to individuate yourselves, an optimal way. Anyway, I'm taking forever on this one question, but just the last one. So they would be the choleric insofar as they're associated with fire, and then the bottom would be the Democrats, so the democratic temperament, or the demos, the people, or if you want to poke fun at them, you can say the peasants, because that is technically what it is, but it's the people. And the reason that I associate the NTPs and the SFJs with the democracy at the bottom is because they're the direct opposite of the aristocrats at the top, because the aristocrats value, in a sense, they value themselves, or they regard themselves as the only reliable criterion of value. And everybody else should be viewing it essentially that way. And the notion, right, is that depending on what your position is, you should be able to, the goal is to be able to optimize your performance and optimize the quality of your life. Ayn Rand, perfect example of this. That's the goal of the aristocrats, trying to optimize your performance in whatever field from where you are, because that's the only thing that you know with any great degree of certainty, is your own position. Why would you be going around trying to tell other people how to optimize their positions? So that's the aristocrat. But the demos is the complete opposite, because for them, they're trying to organize themselves in terms of harmony. It's like completely different. They're not trying to optimize things. They're trying to understand what are the conditions of the entire universe, and how do I position myself ethically in terms of this entire universe and all these other people's different contexts that are bearing down on me and require me to take those into account, right, in that democratic way. You get the vote in, and then you decide what you're going to do. And so they are always going for universality. And it's that notion, like with the peasants, because they all they tend to group together, and they elect their leaders. But also, I've noticed that NTPs and SFJs, in sort of a metaphorical way, tend to very much value precisely what is not flashy or not flashy, though that certainly is a part of it. What is, they don't like the notion of the strong man, right? The notion of there being this one leader who he knows what is best and he is going to lead the masses behind him. Or even just of the single ideology or of the single event, because that's what SENI always zeroes in on. They're like, I need the one event, the one thing that I can focus on and then communicate to people. So, but then you get Foucault, right? Who I don't know for sure actually what IDRLabs types them as. I believe it's behind the paywall, so I'm not going to try not to give any indication. But me having read Foucault, I think that at the very least he fits into NTP, I think. But, in any case, the point being that one of the things that he does is he emphasizes the notion that it's very, very complicated what was going on, and we don't owe changes to any particular figure. We owe it to this very complicated and democratic interaction of forces that how do I put it? There's that passage in the essay Genealogy, Nietzsche, History, or I'm not quoting that right, but where he starts it out by saying there isn't a single clear, coherent narrative in history. It's full of plunderings and deceptions and all these little individual elements. And I've noticed that with NTPs, often their humor and their irony will take the form of not only self-deprecation of saying it, I have these wants, but I'm just this tiny little human being on a speck on a planet in this whole universe. I can't be that important, right? They do that, and they also tend, I think, to devaluate or poke fun of the strong man in every instance, because they're like, you're what? Do you think you're like a god or something? Because they're poking fun at the aristocrats. They're saying, are you really that great? What about all these other little factors that contributed to your greatness that you need to keep in mind? So they're always kind of trying to dissect things. I think Nietzsche. So I think 1984 is a great expression of the conflict between the theocrats and the merchants, because 1984 is the merchants basically saying that what the theocrats are always going to lead to Big Brother bearing down on. And a lot of the imagery in 1984, I think, is very helpful here, because you have Big Brother with his ideology, but he changes his ideology, and then he rewrites history to fit his ideology. Which I think is an unconscious jab at what NI sometimes does. But then it also acts as though it's really great and it knows what's best for you, but it's always getting into your personal space, like kind of FE tends to do from the FI perspective. And it also, that whole end scene in 1984 where literally Winston is like chained to a plank and O'Brien is re-educating him into the correct way to view things is so that's like that it's like a polemic against the clergy sort of types. I think that's a way of looking at it. Whereas the clergy will always say that the merchants, they'll give the Dostoevsky critique from Crime and Punishment, where you have this guy who decides, I'm going to be TEFI, is basically what Dostoevsky's doing. He's saying, I'm going to be TEFI. I'm going to say this is what I think is valuable, and what I think is valuable is for me to finish school, and this is the most optimal way for me to do it, is for me to kill this pawnbroker in cold blood, take her money, and thereby demonstrate that I am not going to be held back by social conventions. And of course he does this, and well, what if everybody did this? Then everybody would be trying to kill each other, right, to get money. And that's Dostoevsky's view of the matter, is that this would lead to chaos. And the merchants disagree because they're like, well, what's wrong with you that you want to kill people? Why, but what other way is there? So the one always tends to lead in its pure philosophical form, not really in everyday life, but in its pure philosophical form, it always tends to lead towards anarchy, and the other view always tends to lead to forms of totalitarianism. So that's why we need lots of both types so that they can keep on fighting each other and so forth. So maybe that answers your question. So if I had to choose one that I fit into, if I'm working off of this schema, then I'm pretty sure I would fit into phlegmatic. I know that, and I do like water as an element for whatever that fits. There's this part of me that's like, oh, it would be so cool if I were melancholy, because melancholy is a cool word, and then I could be like dark, cool, scar on my face, dude, or something dumb like that. So it's like, oh, it'd be so cool if I were melancholic, but I mean, if we're really going by it, I'm pretty sure phlegmatic is really what fits. I even have like allergies where I build up a lot of phlegm, so too much information for you. Okay, let's finally move on. I'm going to get through these, but I just want to check one little thing. Oh, well, yes, greetings to you from America. Thank you. Glad you're here for the thing. Yes, I do apologize that I'm not answering the things in the side, but just wanted to try out something new. And what is with the clout thing in the side? Am I missing something, or I don't know if that's important. Oh, I don't know what clout is. I don't know. Okay, just want to make sure. Just want to make sure it was a joke. Let me see here really quick. I'm doing it. Trying to think in my head. Well, I will look briefly at a couple of the I okay. I do want to look briefly at a couple. There's one question here. I know I said I wasn't going to answer, but it's a simple one. What do I think of Alyosha Karamazov? What his type is? I'm pretty sure that he's more or less a stand-in for Dostoevsky, and so I think he would be INFJ. Going through Brothers Karamazov, that's what I would think. I think that's reasonable, but so anyway, the next question is from Morten Eriksson. It seems that the people behind CognitiveType.com, again CognitiveType, are making progress with regard to their ideas about using visual signals when typing people. They now have an extensive catalog. These are things I've talked about. So they have a catalog of celebrities. They have typed into 64 subtypes on their website. Surprisingly, many of these are typed quite differently from what appears on celebritytypes.com that you have often referred to in your videos. In your opinion, which site offers the most accurate typing of people? Do you think that the theories of CognitiveType.com regarding using visual signals when typing people are plausible, and do you try to integrate them into your own understanding of typology? Do you recognize similar patterns of visual signals among people you have intuitively typed by yourself? And what is your thoughts about their idea of subtypes? All right. Good questions, by the way. Let's go ahead and tackle these. So the first one, what do I think, which site do I think is more accurate? IDRLabs or in their typings of celebrities, IDRLabs or CognitiveType? $1 million question, isn't it? My answer would be, I think that both of them are true and consistent to their criteria that they've chosen that they are looking for to distinguish people into types. So I think that insofar as both of them are ultimately looking for different things, I think they both have very good, consistent eyes for finding what they're looking for. Celebrity types is definitely not looking for facial expressions, unless I have been completely duped. My own looking into their, because I've talked not extensively, but I've talked a little bit with them about their methods, and they do talk about their methods, and mainly what they're doing is they're reading what the person's written, they're watching interviews and listening to what the person says, and it's what they're mainly trying to do is kind of more of how I try to approach it, which is what is the content of what they're saying, and what are the underlying philosophies that are being adhered to in what they're saying. So whereas with cognitive type, they're saying that they're focusing on what facial expressions are caused by what is essentially biological, I think, more or less biological processes that are going on in the brain, or at least in the cognition, that show themselves on the face. Anyway, I've said that a billion times, sorry. So which do I think offers the most accurate typing of people? I am kind of evading the question, but that is partly because I'm not sure. I think that cognitive type, insofar as they are looking for the facial expressions and what they believe those facial expressions show about the person's attitudes, I think they are then accurate. I I prefer IDRLabs only because, like I've said before, they type a lot of dead people, right, who you can't look at their facial expressions. And I'm more interested in the philosophy and the philosophical aspect. So I tend to favor them simply because that's what they tend to focus on. But once again, it is difficult because the assumption, right, is that each of these people does have a almost like a metaphysical form of a type that is there, and we're trying to figure out how to determine it. And one is using one method and one is using the other, and I don't want to choose one over the other. I guess I'll be honest. I'll put it this way. I am rather skeptical of CognitiveType's list of celebrities, but that may simply be because I have not learned the techniques they're using. And it really does come down to just a question of method. I'm focused on just what is the guy saying, how is he saying it. For instance, they type Sam Harris as ISTP with a subtype of NI, a focus on NI, and that does still fit him into the quadra that that IDRLabs places him in, because they type him as INFJ. So actually, in a sense, they're very, very similar on, say, Sam Harris. It's just slight differences, because as far as the functions go, IDRLabs says INFJ, which is another way of saying dominant NI with tertiary TI. And CognitiveTypes is saying, well, technically we think that he is really TI dominant in IDRLabs terminology, but he has a fixation on NI and therefore seems like he's an INFJ. And that's essentially what they're saying. I guess I have to say I don't know. Obviously, I favor IDRLabs, partly through familiarity, partly through I like their... I care more about their typing of philosophers, but because I'm trying to be honest here, but I have nothing but respect for Juan Sandoval and what he's doing. So looking at the other parts of the question, do you think the theories regarding visual signals when typing people are plausible? I do. I think that's a plausible notion. I think it needs more time and study and things to help work out kinks and things. That's what I would assume anyway, because everything has kinks that it needs to work out. And do you try to integrate them into your own understanding of typology? I don't, because mainly because I haven't really learned any of them, and because, like I've said, I'm trying to focus on just the content of what they say. And because I do consider, I mean, you are looking at facial expression, so that is technically you're entering a more behaviorist realm with that, though I don't think that's a bad thing here, because they are being smart about it. So, do you recognize similar patterns of visual signals among people you have intuitively typed by yourself? Now, that is an interesting question, because the answer is actually yes. I have noticed that when I'm trying to type people, whether I like it or not, I'm unconsciously trying to recognize signals and seeing kind of how they uphold themselves. Though I am very willing to disregard those if I find that it seems to fly in the face of what they are in fact saying. So this leads into it, like with the Sam Harris example. It's kind of like, it's a lot easier to, I think, determine whether or not someone is in a particular quadrum. It's a lot harder to determine what the exact, you could say, dominance hierarchy of the functions are, because it's easier for me anyway to try to determine, okay, what axes are you on? Which of these four temperaments are you in? Then once you're there, it's kind of more wishy-washy and difficult to tell, because both of them did put Harris into the same quadra, but they flipped around on what they thought which of the functions was more dominant. So in a certain sense, they actually agreed on Sam Harris, because IDRLabs is like, well, we consider the function more dominant if it's more present in the contents of what he's saying. Whereas CognitiveTypes is saying, no, we consider it more dominant if we see it more clearly expressed in his facial expressions. But we do recognize that people can have fixations on certain functions, and we believe that the content of what he's saying and some of the facial expressions associated with that represents a fixation. So essentially, they both typed him as INFJ, but they say it in different ways, and it's not quite as simple as just saying it's the same. I know that there's a lot of other radically different typings, though, and I'm not quite sure. It's possible that the great discrepancy is because CognitiveType is still figuring out all of the details and working out kinks, like I said, but I don't know for sure because I don't know the I don't know their system as well. But as far as myself, I have found, and I think people do often make use of personal associations with what certain facial expressions and things or body language tend to convey. Like, you know, some of these more general notions of the NI stare, where it's like, I'll notice that, and it will influence my judgment to a degree, as like a factor, but it's like I don't want to be wholly determined by that. As for my thoughts about their idea of subtypes, I think that's interesting. I think it's a natural extension. I think that you start running into, how do I say it? Not definition issues, but just sort of structure issues, because it's a way of trying to divide things up more finely, which I'm all for. It's a way of trying to help, make it more specific what you're trying to say, and or what it really means that you're a particular type, because people will look at a bunch of INFJs and say, well, there's differences in how each of these INFJs. That presumably is the case. And so it's a way to deal with that. So I think it's interesting. I'm not... and I've essentially used it in a very primitive form when I've suggested the notion that somebody, or myself, for instance, has stronger TI, just because I notice that's the way I describe the way that I think. But I've wondered whether or not that's a more regular INFJ trait, and it's just a matter of it's more obvious in me, or our conception of INFJ has been incorrect, and that's part of why I emphasize TI a lot in the INFJ video. But let's see, there is a reply on that question. Oh, yes. So next question. Have you thought about setting up a Celebrity Types IDRLabs type site for typings that interest you? Before I answer that question, I am going to... I'm trying to interact sort of with the chat, because, let's see here. Okay. I will go ahead and move on to the next question. Like I said, have I ever thought about setting up my own IDRLabs site? No. Well, okay. Some of you who have been following my channel for the longest time will know there was that point where I do have a blog website-ish thing that I have not updated in forever. But that is the blog site that hosts my video scripts. So when I link to a video script, that's where it's taking you to, where I put it and I arrange it nicely. So I use it for that. I was originally trying to use it to, I wanted to do that with it. I also had originally wanted to have more kind of like a blog, but I realized very, very quickly that that wasn't really going to work for me, just because I didn't have time and it would take away from my actually making videos. I did and still do have a list of fictional character typings for fun there. I haven't looked at that in forever. It was good practice for me to try to learn how to recognize and figure out if I really understood what I was talking about when I talked about functions and things. But it's very old. Anyway, no, I have no... if the question is really do I have interest in setting up any kind of competing views with IDRLabs, I don't have any interest in making a competing site at all. I don't really have any interest at all in competing with IDRLabs at all. And you don't even have to say competing. I mean, I guess I've disagreed, but I don't think I've ever really been very clear, and I can't actually think of anywhere that I per se disagree on an issue. So I guess the simple answer is no, sorry. I agree with them a great deal and their typings. Next question. Hey, Michael, big fan of your... Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. You're a big fan of your work. And I did see... what was I going to say? Well, I'll just continue. My question, what is your opinion on the Big Five personality assessment? Also, since we're talking about the Big Five, well, okay, well, I'll get to that second part because you're talking about Jordan Peterson. I'll get to that in a moment. The Big Five personality assessment, I've talked about it a bit before. In the one video where I was defending Jungian typology, I talked about it and the fact that I consider the Big Five to essentially be heir to the Myers-Briggs work, which I would think ought to be rather obvious because they use extroversion, introversion, and Jung coined extroversion, introversion. That came from Jung. Myers used it, proved you could test for it, and generally speaking, people find, I think, I don't know for certain, I would need to look it up, but if I'm right, I believe that extroversion, introversion is one of the strongest. It's the trait on the Myers-Briggs test that people are the least sketchy about, as it were. But I'm not sure about that. That's just been my impression. But the point being that so as I've looked into the Big Five, I consider it, frankly, to be a revamping, more or less, and an edit to what the Myers-Briggs type indicator was doing. The revamping being because the Myers-Briggs type indicator, it does say, yes, you fit into these categories, but by the very nature of the fact that it's a quantitative assessment, let me make sure this is focused. By the very nature of the fact that it is a quantitative assessment, it does still grade you on a spectrum between extremes. It fits you into those categories because that makes it much easier, but if you've ever taken these tests, it'll say you are 50% E, or more than that, you are 75% E and this percent I, and that's not strict. I don't believe that's. I believe that's what the official MBTI instrument does, but I don't see why they wouldn't, because you could go back and track through and see how you answered on the various questions, because there isn't just one question for determining E versus I, so you could get a percentage. Anyway, so what the Big Five is doing is they were explicitly trying to say, we're not going to put you into a type. We're not putting a type grid on our data, on the spectrum, because we're being more scientific, which I guess in their view was by not actually analyzing the data that they have. I think I'm straw manning a bit here too. So sorry about that. I don't actually have anything against the big five. The only thing I have really is just the fact that I feel like, and note the word feel, it is a feeling, and that's all it is. But I do feel like, and I think a lot of people feel like the big five, people have sort of set it up as this is how you really do the MBTI, and it's like, okay, because people are very annoyed by the MBTI for some reason. But I haven't, I haven't done, I'm not as familiar with it, but it isn't terribly difficult to understand. And it links up with the Myers-Briggs because the at least the first four, not dichotomies, but traits on the big five link up with the Myers-Briggs traits, and then they add in that last trait, even though the neurotic trait, neuroticism, even though neuroticism, from what little I've looked into it, is one of the least strong. I don't know. I think they're kind of just doing a repeat of what Myers was doing and running into similar problems that she originally ran into. Like with that last trait, a lot of people I've noticed on the J and P, on the Myers-Briggs, the J and P dichotomy, will find that to be the most flip-floppy, right? Hence why you have that classic INFJs versus INFPs typing issues, because the J and the P was the weakest thing to type for. Then Big Five came in, and if they've done anything, I think something they've done very good is basically just saying, okay, the J and the P is just conscientiousness. That's really what you're trying to type for, but you keep getting this Jungian stuff in the way. So let's just call it what it is. What you're really trying to type for with that is conscientiousness. Let's pull in the slack and say, this is what we are looking for, these traits, this is how they're defined, and then they look for them. So I think that they shored up the judging, perceiving into conscientiousness, and that made it much stronger, but then they added on this last trait, which is the neuroticism, which is just like J and P was, it is not as strong. But I'm kind of talking, I'm not really talking from a base here, because I can't actually show you studies. So be sure to call me out on on things that I say that might be naively wrong. So probably from what I've just said, you're probably gathering that I don't like the big five. And probably that's true unconsciously, but consciously I don't want to dislike the big five, because for me to dislike it, it would be rather petty, because it's just sort of like, I don't like it because of me feeling threatened by there being another big boy in town or something, and it's like, well, okay, whatever. I shouldn't have anything against it, because they are trying to do, or are doing. Sorry about that. Yeah. Can you all hear me now? I'm back on. I don't know what happened. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's back on. My apologies for that. But it is back on, so we are pushing forward. So the second part of the question, since we're talking about the big five, naturally Jordan Peterson comes to mind, being as he's made it so popular. I've heard you mention him in a couple of videos, didn't know if you had any thoughts on what his type might be. Some people have said he's ESTJ. Walker doesn't agree. So anyway, yeah, let's talk about Jordan Peterson a bit, because he's a hot topic right now. So sorry. Yeah, so it should be back now. Give me a few moments to... yeah, just a little bit. I'm a little bit broken. I'm going to take just... if it goes off again, I might be off just a couple of minutes trying to figure out maybe a more effective way of doing it, so don't freak out. But I'm determined to keep doing this, because I haven't even hit 2 hours yet. So, Okay. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Jordan Peterson. So as far as his type goes, I don't know what... I know that IDRLabs has typed him. I believe it's behind the paywall. I haven't checked because I didn't want to accidentally give away with what my voice is saying, or facial expressions as to what they typed him as, because I'm trying to be good about not revealing anything behind their paywall. But I think, at the very least, I think that he fits into the in Socionics, I believe the beta quadra, so NFJs, STPs. Now, the reason that I at least think that he fits in there is because I see, and this also can serve to show at least how I try to type people. So I'll run you through my thought process that kind of went through it originally. So the first thing that I noticed when I first started, when I first saw a video or two of his, was that he actually reminded me of myself to a degree, at least in the way that I sound when I'm rambling, but not. And that was much more of almost like a facial expression thing. From like just intuitively, I felt like I had, I was seeing similar-ish facial expressions. I felt like I was seeing those. So that, you know, that always kind of happens as a first impression thing. But then, you know, actually looking at what he does, I think that I see what I had been talking about before, that notion of the theocratic temperament, where I believe I'm seeing him focusing in when he's talking on, this is what I'm going to communicate, and then he goes ahead and tries to universalize that idea. And he's roaming back and forth on the stage, and he's coming up with these different things that he then focuses on, and his whole attention turns to, this is the next thing that I'm going to talk about. But it changes as he goes across the stage. The other thing you'll notice is that depending on the video, he'll have very similar themes, but depending on the context that he's in at a given moment, he'll be he'll frame something in a different way. It's kind of hard to describe, but you see it a bit in my videos, right? Where depending on the video, when I make the video as though it's supposed to be a self-contained whole, and it's supposed to answer all of the questions that you could ever have about this topic, and it doesn't, of course, because no one can ever do that, but that's sort of what I'm sort of unconsciously trying to do, is each video is meant to answer all the questions. The fact that, of course, there's like over 100 videos means that if each one is trying to provide the ultimate answers, then they're all going to be sort of slightly different. It's very Hegelian, because I think Hegel is a good example of NI, because he thinks in terms of, now we have this idea, and this is the truth, except it slowly starts to fall apart until we revolutionize, and now we have the new and improved truth, which is kind of similar but totally different. And you keep doing this until finally you get to the perfect core that encapsulates everything. So anyway, with Jordan Peterson, I feel like I see that, how he varies, but he still retains similar themes. But each lecture he speaks with this sort of passion, because he's trying to communicate these singular insights. And so you get that notion of him, you see that a lot, I think, with the beta quadra, where they can't really, I don't think they can really help, but because of the way that they operate, they naturally operate in terms of gathering what you could call following. Like my YouTube channel. You know, I try to counter... So what I mean by that is, given that you have a type who is has a very focused notion of what they're going to say. It's singular and it comes from a single point, but they're trying to explain this to a large group of people who come from very different perspectives and trying to basically persuade them into this singular point, almost like to initiate them into your own context and the benefits of it. This thing is not focused. Whoa. Oh, holy crap. Sorry. I feel like such an old man who doesn't know how to use technology. Okay, continuing on. With Jordan Peterson, you get that. Sorry, I'm trying to. I can't remember what I was saying before, so I'm sorry about that. So I believe he's in that beta because yes, you create a following, and it's not conscious because given that you're trying to persuade all these people of this one thing, then naturally it's always a matter of if you agree with what I'm saying, then I'll continue talking about it. So of course people will follow you around because that's naturally how that's how it operates, and I feel like that's happened with Jordan Peterson, and it happens with plenty of other people too. You can't really avoid it with the beta temperament. They develop followings. That's just how it happens, and I see that clearly with Jordan Peterson, and it's I would lean towards. I wouldn't be surprised if he were any of those four types in there. The only reason I lean towards INFJ is more of just because if I had to choose one of those types, I would choose INFJ because even though he may not strike people as an INFJ type because people have the notion of the very sort of mystical, soft, Sam Harris sort of INFJ, and then you have Jordan Peterson, who's very he does have that ESTJ flavor, or at least what people associate with the ESTJ. I don't think it's actually how the ESTJ is, but that like sort yourself out, bucko, and that sort of thing. That's not what people associate with INFJ. Nevertheless, I think that is the best way of describing him, because that's how those are the function axes that he demonstrates, and also because of his great love for Jung, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Solzhenitsyn. Three of those guys are, I think, very likely INFJs. One of them's an INTJ who lots and lots of INFJs seem to like, and so because he's an NI explosion. So I would lean more towards there. I also do think that he is, even though when he gets up on a stage, he can get sort of, he can get very, very passionate, but I think INFJs can definitely get very passionate, because and you start to see this bleed, I think, between the INFJ and the ESTP, because they're both dominant perceiving types, and they both are trying to communicate these clear insights to an audience, and I think you actually start to see slippage there. So I don't know if that quite answers the question. I'm not making... Well, I'll make... I know he's very controversial. I have a lot of respect for Jordan Peterson. I've developed a lot of respect. It's actually very deep respect. I think, for whatever it's worth, that he is a genuinely good person who is trying to do the right thing in the world, and I try to avoid, or I do avoid politics or social issues, not because I don't actually have some very strong feelings, but because I don't feel like that's what this channel should be. I think that what the channel I've been creating, one of the benefits is that I allow it to be I want it to be a place where people can go where they don't have to worry so much about that. And that's not possible because all the time, you naturally run into things. I mean, for heaven's sakes, I've been making those Jesus videos. So, so I guess I threw out the completely neutral thing out the window. But I mean, aside from that, that's not so much on current issues, like, because obviously Peterson has become very well known for his talking about identity politics and things like that. And it's not that I don't have opinions on those things, but I don't want the channel to at all become consumed by those things when there's other intelligent people to talk about it. So because I've thought about these things a lot, but I've felt like I only ever want to touch lightly. So all I can really say is I will also say this, that as I'm sure you could tell from the Derrida video, I did not like the way that he's demonized Derrida. I think he's been a bit naive, but I don't, what are you going to do? Everybody has prejudices and things. And it does make it easier for him to talk about what he perceives as problems in universities. I think there are, I think he gets a bit alarmist, as I think someone put it, but I also think that he uses Derrida and Marx as useful figureheads, which I think is also in an NFJ or STP tendency, is to say, here's the figurehead for the idea that I'm trying to communicate. And so he's chosen those as very useful figureheads, but I think I've been thinking about making a similar-ish video to the Derrida one about Marx, although I'm not as sympathetic to Marx. I think there's problems with Marx, but I don't think they're the problems that Peterson has pointed out or that many people think there are. But I need to do some more looking into it, because I think he's interesting, but that's especially a touchy area, I think, more than Derrida, frankly. So I don't know if that answers questions about Peterson. I was thinking maybe I would talk more about it, but I don't know if I want to at this point. I will allow myself to be distracted by the chat briefly. Lean towards INFJ when he clearly seems more like... Why lean towards INFJ when he clearly seems more like an INTJ? Well, so, yeah, a lot of people have said things. It seems like a Marx video would be an interesting... I'm not sure how to deal with the chat. I am so sorry. You guys can keep talking. Gosh, I guess part of the point of having a live stream thing... Oh, well, thanks. I do feel like I play victim too much unconsciously. And by saying sorry and stuff. So I hope I don't make people feel bad for me. It happens naturally. But anyway, that's where I lean for his typing anyway. Like I said, I don't know where IDRLabs places him, but I will also say that I do understand a lot of the other typing. Some people have typed him INTJ. I understand that. I understand where people are coming from, but I do stand behind. I think that his the way that he's approached things, I think the way that he centralizes his points, but then tries to express them in this universalist way to a large group. I think the way that he has naturally developed a following, and that he has a pseudo, I would describe it as an unintentional and inevitable pseudo spiritual effect on people, that I think you get with NI, and I think you can get it with other functions, but I think it especially comes up with the INFJ, and that's because you're dealing with, you get someone who is communicating something that is meant to be deep, profound, is meant to cut beneath all of the mud and dirt, and at least in their mind, and cut through all of that. And then when you add to that the notion that you have someone who is trying to communicate it to a large audience and is doing it in a way that is meant to harmonize with them, then you very naturally get that kind of spiritual mentality. I don't know if I expressed that very well, but let's move ahead. Let's push forward. But like I said, I do, I obviously could be completely wrong about Dr. Peterson. What would you guess to be, this is Jack Hauser, what would you guess to be some more realistic statistics of type distribution? Specifically, do you believe allegedly rare types to be so in reality? Excuse me. That's a classic question. I guess I'm a little bit on the fence. I have definitely wondered a lot about the type distribution. That's a classic thing. Probably, one way to encapsulate the question is to say, why are there so many INFJs on the internet? Or at least why there seem to be so many. So there's a couple of things to point out. First of all, there's the natural point of, even though you see lots of INFJs on the internet, that's not what you would call a random sample of the population, because the INFJs, if they are such a rare type, you would notice them more, and they would tend to congregate in, like, for instance, artistic clubs when I was in high school, in college too, you would find a lot of intuitive types, because they liked to gather together because they recognized their intuition, or at least they thought they did. But the more important thing is probably that our minds are not built for the kind of statistical analysis that we like to use to analyze large populations. We have very pragmatic minds, as I'm sure plenty of you know. Our minds are very pragmatic, and so one manifestation of this is that if you see, say, if you've been told that INFJs are rare, and then you go to like a meeting, or you go on the internet and you see that there's like there's about a dozen INFJ channels, then you instantly think to yourself, well, they're not rare at all, because you assume that if there's an even distribution, then you should see 12 dozen ISFJ channels and only like 1 or 2 INFJ channels. The point being that your mind, if you see a larger grouping of things, then you naturally will think, well, that's a whole lot of that thing. So the fact that people notice there being a lot of INFJs doesn't necessarily translate over to there actually being a lot. That was kind of a roundabout way to answer the question, but I think you get the point. Another thing that's worth pointing out is that I actually once made a little chart. It's very basic, but I went to Myers-Briggs and a couple of others. I don't know, I assume that the way that they collect their results is just from, it would ultimately be self-reporting, or people self-reporting on a test. and then you get the types back, and then they say, okay, this is how many people. Myers has a number of charts in gifts differing from studies that she did with what she was the best she could get with random samples, and I think she did a pretty good job. But anyway, the point being that when you actually work out, because it's often said only 1% of the population is INFJ, or somewhere around 1%. 1% is yeah, it's small, but if you think about daily life, that technically only works out to 1 out of 100 people, which is still that is a thin sliver, but it's not as thin as I think people would think, because what that ultimately means is that everybody knows, at least, not like friends with, but at least knows probably far more than just 100 people. So that means that statistically speaking, every single one of us should know someone who is INFJ, if we are to take those statistics as properly representing the number of INFJs in the population. So if the 1% thing is true, then it's still, it's rarer in comparison with other types, but it's also like you could still run into them. And the fact that running into the types, if you are looking for them, then you'll probably find them clumped together in places. And if there's only 1 out of every 100 in the population, thereabouts, that's still quite a few. And it means you will go through life and probably meet a number of people who are INFJs. However, so those are a couple of considerations. Excuse me. I should also, one more consideration, and this is something that an acquaintance or a friend of mine pointed out, which was that it should also be kept in mind that this was someone who actually was training to become a typer, or someone who types for a company. And so they were actually going out and typing people, or asking them if they could type them. It wasn't a come and learn about your personality, which stereotypically a lot of INFJs, INFPs, INTJs, a lot of these types like to do that more, stereotypically, of course, but she was actually going out to people, and she was finding, no, the type distribution, at least from her context, her small sphere that she was working in, for whatever that's worth, she was finding, no, they are rarer. It's more of just they're more likely to actually want to come and learn their personality. And I don't know about that, but that could be another factor. Now, however, those are all just kind of like considerations to keep in mind that might make it easier to deal with the fact that it often feels, people will often feel like, well, there should only be like 1 INFJ in my life, right? Or like 1 INFJ on all of YouTube, even though INFJs as a type like to express their insights and revelations to large groups of people in an impersonal way, kind of like what I'm doing now, because I'm not even really interacting with the chat. So, you probably expect to find them on YouTube. So I don't know if that really fully answers the question, but I think that's all I really have on it. I think that the rarity, I don't think that is incorrect. I don't see any good reason for that to be an incorrect analysis. I think a better way of putting it would be that the rarity that is predicted is not actually as rare as we may think of when we think that something is rare. That it doesn't actually mean as much as we might think or like it to mean in everyday life and what we're doing in everyday life. So next question. This is Ahmed Helmi. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Thanks for doing this. Well, thank you for, I don't know if you're watching or not. Been a fan for a while, and it's always fun to see some behind closed doors vids. Hopefully I'm not late. Oh, no, you're not late. I'm looking at your thing right now. Oh, we have a number of questions. Oh, I remember. I remember looking at your comment now, and seeing these questions. Okay, well, let's try to tackle these. Number one, while inferior SE has, I think, been discussed over 9,000 times, yes, it has, but do you think of any other manifestations of it other than over or under indulging in food and other activities similar to it? And there's some more talking about it. That's I've wondered about that too, actually, about whether or not I was being overly, or I've been overly simplistic in my discussion of it. I think you're right that inferior SE covers more than just, over indulgence or under indulgence in sensual pleasures. I do think that that's a common manifestation. Though if we go back to, let me just briefly read the rest of the comment. Oh, yeah. So if we go back to what SE should theoretically mean, and then we say, okay, so what happens when that is more repressed or primitive or black and white, as I think happens with inferior functions. So if we go back to what SE means, it would theoretically be an externally directed focus, or an external orientation towards what Jung would describe as sensations, but which I describe as what the things out there really are. One way that you could say it is like the denotations, the literal interpretations of stuff and material out there. Denotations, literalness, and it's externally focused. So just as an example, I think most of the extroverted functions, by virtue of it being extroverted, it doesn't retain as much. It goes from object to object, and it tries to get a breadth. And so, whereas, SE versus SI, and I've struggled immensely to describe SI, but I think I finally got it down. I think I finally figured out, like, in a better way, not that I didn't understand it before, but I think I understand it better than I have before. Because SE, excuse me, a good way of putting it, so I have an INFP friend who, he gave me some, he did a good job of explaining it. Well, I won't go into the whole story, but the point was that you hold in your mind SI has, I think, a lot to do, I don't know why. Well, I will talk about SI briefly because there's a few more questions that have to do with it. Actually, the next question is about that. So I'll hold off on SI for now. The point being that inferior SE, if we're given that it's supposed to be a focus on real life right now in the here and now, remembering that it's connected with SE and I, it's here's the reality, I can see it, it's right there. So if you make that inferior, then the result is you make it more primitive, and I think you make it more black and white by doing that, by making it inferior. So it's not that it's not there, it's more that there's only like two options. It's either really on or it's more or less off. So either I'm not noticing at all the physical objects or the real data around me. There's also the fact, by the way, that I think of SE in terms of just sensual real data, whereas I think it can be viewed somewhat more nuanced than that. But I view it that way. I'm either not paying attention to it, or I switch or attempt to switch into SE mode, where it's like I block out all of the NI interpretations and I'm just focusing on, like, I can't even really do it while I'm talking because I can't focus enough. Like, I have to completely focus on the blackness of the book and the white pages and all the little details. Um, so what? So that can express itself in, like, say, overindulgence. Because either you're off, you're not thinking about food at all, or you decide, oh, this really tastes good. I'll just eat that all the time because I don't want to have to think about it, and it tastes really good. But setting the food aside, I think um, he's given an example in the comment um, of extreme tunnel vision, or also high sensitivity to noises and things. I think it can express itself like that. I think ultimately what it is that your apprehension or your relationship to what is denoted externally is primitive. So it will be rather all or nothing, and it will be rather radical. And that's why I use that overindulgence or underindulgence view. But it can apply to really anything that has to do with the sensations that are kind of bombarding you. So, a person could be completely overwhelmed by all the colors. Or another way it can manifest is liking somewhat slavishly photorealism, or really, really liking something that is almost like, what's the word? Like really, really bright colors and like outlandish shades, because it triggers all your thought processes on it, even though others might find it to be rather tasteless. I don't know if that's maybe the best example, but I don't know if that helps explain it, but I find it hard to focus again. It is also important to note that there are other mental states that transcend typology. So, and that's one thing that I wouldn't ever want to do, by the way, is I wouldn't want someone to take typology and say, oh, I don't really suffer from depression, right? I'm just in like in a loop of a function, or some concept like this. It's like, I mean, yeah, please don't do that. Like, I don't have a hard and fast rule, but please I think, especially when it comes to your own health, especially your mental health, this really needs to take a bit of a back seat to any other dominating problems. Um, so I almost sort of hesitate, because I think it is important to note that, someone, for instance, might, like, say, I could see someone becoming confused between inferior SE, or inferior SE being entangled with and therefore manifesting partly in symptoms that would be classified as also another disease. So someone might have elements of Asperger's, for instance, be very sensitive to light or loud noises, but they may not do anything about that because they assume that it is wholly explained by the type, when really there's multiple layers and multiple angles to it. So please don't stop taking your medication because of something I said. Not that any of you are doing that, but I just figured I'd point that out. So next question, when do you think it's a good age to start typing yourself or someone type you? Early, late teenage years, or maybe older? Um, Honestly, yeah, I don't quite know. I don't think there's really a specific age that's best. I suppose the assumption is that the brain is more, something to do with maybe the brain being more developed or something like that. I couldn't say anything about that. I'm of the opinion that, to be honest, I can notice elements of, maybe not types, or certainly not types, but elements of typology that seem to manifest in even like toddlers, that's something that it's like, well, I'm not going to like provide a diagnosis or some, however you would say it, because it's like, well, it might just be because that's how they are as a toddler. Like, I don't know. And also, I don't think it's going to help very much because, if the toddler can't talk, then it's like, well, I can't analyze the content or anything. But so I guess the answer is I don't think that there is a good age. I don't think there's necessarily an age. But the main reason that I'm saying that is because as you could probably see from my channel, I don't really have any theory about how the things I've talked about with type hook up with biology or with, say, neurochemistry or anything like that. I still don't really have any good theory about that. Maybe someday in the future. Dario Nardi was certainly trying to do something with that. So yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a good age, but probably when you're an adult, because you're assuming that the assumption is that you're more stable as a personality then. You haven't been finding yourself, but at the same time, you can still have problems then because people by then have created adaptive measures, right, to their environment that might conceal how they're really thinking or feeling. And that's, I think, a possibility, though, you can have similar problems with them as a baby because it's like, well, how do you know what personality a baby is? It's a baby. So, next question. When did the strong tertiary TI thingy, oh yes, this, my tertiary TI start to become more apparent, or was it always like that? So I guess this connects in. I want to say it's always been like that, but to be honest, I'm not quite sure that's the case. Because, in fact, I don't believe that's the case, but because I think I'm confusing just the fact that I've always been a very kind of quiet, observant, even as a little kid, I was always sort of watching, and there's elements of that but as far as, if I had to choose a point where it started manifesting, probably, for me anyway, in late middle school and then high school, I started feeling more and more, and probably especially in college, actually. College is probably where it started coming out the most, because that's when I started studying philosophy. Excuse me. And that's where I really started discovering and developing the part of me that is all about trying to make very clear logical distinctions between things and organizing things. Also, as I started researching typology and learning about that, but I feel like it's been there. That was more of just me developing it. And I do feel like I have a lot of exterior trappings of, say, an INTP or of TI because of, like I've said, my upbringing. My dad is a very strongly typed INTP, and he's also, both my parents, very sort of rational, reasonable people. They're FETI. They're both on FETI. It's an INTP and an ISFJ. Both very calm, collected, and very focused on, we're going to do what is reasonable to do. There's not really, this is not an FI household, let's put it that way. So hence why I think it was very difficult for my ISFP brother at times, just because of the way the type dynamics go, because FETI is, the TI there, you're governing everything by universal rules of logic. Anyway, so that's, I think, when it started to become more apparent, is when I started studying philosophy, but even before then it kind of... Number 4, are you going to update your fictional characters types lists soon? I am very sorry, I don't think so in the near future. I'm focusing on other things. But if there is a public outcry, then, I mean, then I might do something more with it. I have always found it rather fun or amusing or almost soothing to be able to kind of organize or categorize different characters into them, but it can also, on the other hand, suddenly become extraordinarily stressful because it's like, I can't figure out which one they are, and I keep flipping back and forth. But it is good practice, but right now the answer is no, I'm not really doing a whole lot with that on the blog thing, but I am flattered that you've actually looked at the blog because I don't think a lot of people know about that. If you do want to look at the blog, it's if you go to my channel page, I believe it should be there. It's one of the options on that little bar thing on the channel heading. All the channels have it. You can also, if you just go to one of my videos and look for where, click on looking for the video script, then that's where it is. It's on the blog, and then you can navigate from there. So, all right. Next question. Hi, Michael. Thank you. Could you explain how? Well, thank you too. You're welcome. Could you explain how SI works and how this relates to following rules or to being conservative? $1 million question, isn't it? So let's talk about SI briefly, because I think I've got a better grip on SI. So, and I had talked about earlier about Derrida and about the notion that Derrida's philosophy expresses a lot of elements of the ENFP. And I think that especially comes out with the his talking about his critique of what he calls the metaphysics of presence. And I think that you could basically make that, I don't think it has to be this way, but I think one way that you could, in a sense, critique the critique of the metaphysics of presence is by renaming it the metaphysics of SE /NI, because SE, and somewhat in tendency with NI, is focused on the external presence of things, I think is one way you could put it, because it's focused on the denotation. So it's like, things have an external presence to me. And in, say, the ESTP, one of the things they're doing is they're trying to communicate something by appealing to what is externally impressive to people. So they often take on the role of a showman, right? Like Harry Houdini or Alfred Hitchcock. You know, Alfred Hitchcock gave his simple rule for filmmaking where he's like, if the thing is larger on the screen, then it's more important. That's Hitchcock's rule. It's a very SE notion. In fact, it's almost like SE, or a large element of SE encapsulated, because SI is the complete opposite. SI always, or almost always, devalues the objective presence that a thing has, and revalues or does value the internal presence that the thing has. So SI is about, it doesn't, like, for me, I look at the book, and if I'm trying to go into SE mode, then it's like, well, the book is just there. It's the book. It's not, I'm not really comparing it to anything. I'm just drinking in the external objective data. But with SI, there really is that sense that there is an ideal book. I call it an ideal book. But there's a book inside of them that they are comparing the impressions to. But let me go at it from a different angle, because I've used that explanation before, and I don't know if it quite explains things clearly enough. I prefer more of the notion of the external versus internal presence. Because for SI, there is, I believe, this sense that things are not defined by their external presence for SI. They're defined by the internal meaning that they invoke in the subject. So what this means is that objects or situations or songs or what have you, for the SI user, develop very personal meanings for them over time, or, you know, in the moment. They are impressed by things. So they essentially don't experience objects. They experience objects insofar as they relate to the meanings that they have already in their mind. And so you have these personal associations that you make with objects. A great example is Freud. In the beginning of his Psychopathology in Everyday Life, his book, Psychopathology in Everyday Life. I believe that's it. He starts it out and he runs you through his method, where what he's doing literally is he's showing how these slips of the tongue, in his view, always have to do with concrete associations between words or images or feelings or so forth. So like his classic little chart where he says, you know, this is the name of such and such an artist, but I said this name, and here's the complicated internal list of associations that I unconsciously made that led me to make this mistake. That's a very SI sort of notion, that it's these internal associations that you make with objects, with everyday objects. SE doesn't do that. SE makes associations like that with ideas, which are possibly about objects, but as far as physical objects go, or objects in experience, or situations or events in your experience, you take it as it comes. Each one is its own thing, whereas SI is more transcendent and eternal. So how does this relate to rules and being conservative? Well, SI, if what's going on is you're making things are internally present for you, and so another way to put it is that you're trying to not be beguiled by the notion that just because something is larger on the screen, therefore it's more important. SI fights against that. SI, I think, wherever you find it, and I think to a lesser degree TI, because TI goes against TE, which is a similar thing to SE. TE is saying if the thing can be measured, then it's like more existent. Like the more results, or the more that the thing works, and the more measurable results that it produces, the more important the thing is. That's how TE is. But TI always rebels against this, because they're like, yeah, but what about this consideration or this consideration? They don't like that notion that a thing should have to be expected to show forth those kinds of external results. They want the thing to simply adhere to internal principles. SI and SE is very, very similar, because SI always devalues SE's notion that because a thing is more externally present, more externally important, that therefore that's what importance is. Just want to check a thing. Sorry. So so SI, I think, it devalues that, and so that's where I think with, say, INFPs who have the tertiary SI, that's why you find a lot of INFP characters who are these very innocuous, like Harry Potter, like he lives in his basement, but he's secretly the most important person ever. You find that a lot, whereas with, say, Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, he's already like the greatest person ever. Like he knows how to do kung fu fighting, and he knows how to do all these things. Like he's this action hero versus like this innocuous Harry Potter, or like Winston or whoever, So that kind of a notion. So anyway, the reason that it's about following rules or being conservative, or at least it can be about that, is because things are internally present to you. So you're trying to not be beguiled, as it were, by, the Hitchcocks in the world, who are trying to appeal to your sense of what it's big, it's present, it's sensory, therefore it is more important. SI detests that. They don't like that. They think that a thing should be more important because it fits better with the internal associations, and it has this good internal meaning for you. So you can see how this would relate to following rules. You would have rules or routines or associations or things that you, almost like an ideal sensation that you're trying to replicate. And so you necessarily start doing things the same way in order to replicate that ideal sensation, or to adhere to it the most. So I hope that answers the question. I do want to point out, though, that I wouldn't necessarily describe SI as necessarily being conservative or necessarily following rules, though that, I mean, I know it's a useful way to put it. I would say that it's not conservative in the modern political sense, but simply in the sense of what's really happening with the associations. So it kind of depends on what they decide they're going to be conservative about. So that's what I would say. I'm going to briefly look at the good heavens. The I have neglected the chat and it's gone out of control, so I'm just going to keep on pressing forward. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope it's useful to you. I don't know if I'm going to, actually I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to get through all of the questions this time. I'm going to push forward some more, but what I'll probably do is either have a second session or something like that. I'll think of it in a bit, but I'm going to keep pushing forward for maybe another hour or two and see where we can get. Let's see. Yeah. Do you primarily think in words or images, or neither? Do you believe there's a correlation between type and thinking style? So that notion of the inner... So yeah, I've heard a little bit about thinking styles. So that's the notion that some people think in words, some people think in images, some people think in patterns. I don't know all the specifics. So I actually had a conversation with an INTJ friend of mine. Let me... Terribly sorry I'm doing this. I just realized that I need to... Maybe I should have just left this on the side. Sorry I'm taking you on this wild ride. Not very professional, but I need to... So I'm not actually doing this on my computer. I'm doing this on my phone because I couldn't figure out how to do it on my laptop. Otherwise, I'd be doing it that way. Just a second. Okay. So I don't know if let me... There we go. I don't know if I think more in words or images. I would lean more towards images, but I feel like it's a combination, but I don't think it's even that. So I'm not quite sure if I can answer the question because I know that images are definitely a part of it, but words come to mind a lot too. So I want to say it's a combination of both, but words don't play as prominent a role. Like sometimes, because I'm thinking in terms of what impresses itself upon my consciousness. Like I can certainly, because I do think a lot in images, I think, and that's why I translate it into words so that I can concretize it more. But anyway, that's I think the best I can do there. Another question, is it true that NI DOMs tend to have extremely realistic dreams or nightmares, to the point where it's difficult to distinguish between dreams and memories? Do you ever experience this? I guess so. I'm not sure if I have a good enough comparison of other people's dreams. I kind of have always assumed that everybody can have very realistic dreams. I mean, when I'm in the dream, I generally believe that I'm in the dream, though I have, I feel like I often have a general underlying sense that I'm in a dream, actually more often than I think. usually dreams that I remember are dreams where I have a general notion that I know I'm in a dream, but I can't really control the dream because it's sort of like the dream reality has, um, I mean, I can try almost through like an effort of will to try to change things, which will, that'll actually often happen because I want to say that often my dreams, it's like I'm being taken on this wild ride and I don't always really want to follow it through because there's sometimes this sense of not horrible foreboding, not foreboding, but just of, um, I don't know. I wouldn't, I wouldn't call my dreams unpleasant, though. They are sometimes they're a bit anxiety inducing, but not in a bad way because it's also very refreshing to be able to dream because I do agree with the Jungian notion that we dream all the time because I think at least for me my dreams really do tap into they tap into a lot of the background thinking that my mind or the mind has to do in order to maintain the conscious side of my mind. But there's all this other stuff that's going on in the background. And when I dream, that's a way of my brain kind of trying to contact that and work it out. Because I have noticed, and that's where the notion of a dream symbol, I think, would come from, is that and I have noticed that with myself, that things that, like situations or things that happen in the dream, not specific objects, but generally the full situation, um, will, the situations that I find in fact, I don't think I've ever encountered specific objects. Very, very rarely. It's generally settings or situations that I find myself in, that, or almost like storylines that I find myself in. My dreams almost always have storylines. I'll probably put it that way. They have concrete storylines, and that's generally the focus. The storylines don't make any sense when I wake up, but it does feel like there's a story and there's an impetus to moving forward. So, as to whether they're realistic, that has happened, but I feel like that was more the result of me being like sick at the time or things not quite being balanced. So I guess that answers it. Next, two things I've recently been digging into that I'd love to hear your take on: subtypes in socionics, as well as function development and the ability to skip functions. Like an INFJ who skips over their FE to concentrate on TI because they value it much more. I don't know if I have a whole lot to say on this one because I talked a bit about subtypes before in relation to Juan Sandoval and CognitiveTypes because they have 64 subtypes. So actually I'll refer you to that, but just as a brief summary, I don't have any problem with it. It's a way of helping to help, as I can tell, it's a way of more thinly and specifically slicing and dicing things. So it's useful there, and I certainly have described myself as having, quote, very strong TI or more of a focus on TI, and I think that's true. I guess a part of the problem is that I certainly I haven't put forward a very clear model or theory of precisely what I mean when I say that something is a dominant function versus an inferior function, partly because I've been developing that over time. And I feel like that would help to answer a lot of these questions, like whether you can skip functions, if we had or if I were able to put forth a more clear and coherent notion of what or model of what the actual function stack is and how these different functions interact with each other and so forth. Because then you would know what you really mean when you say that you're skipping functions. Because when you say skip function, that to me implies that what's going on is you think that you have to run through the functions in like a process. And I don't know if that's how it is. Like, I legitimately don't know. I think I would need to come up with more of a model for that. So, let's see. Abdulela Falata. I'm so sorry, because I've seen you comment before, but in my head I feel like I know how to pronounce your name. But hello. Can we say that thinking is black and white evaluation while feeling is concerned with the gray areas? This is a question that goes back a long ways, actually. I think you could view it that way, though I would hesitate to say that that is what defines them. I think it's more of an incidental association. So that thinking tends to have more of that sense of, I want things to be binary, I want things to be clear cut, whereas feeling is more wishy-washy. But I don't feel like that's at all the essence of what those things are. I think that comes simply as that's a possible manifestation of what they really are. And what they really are is, I think, thinking is judging something based on what you could say logical or rational criteria. So criteria that are, and so in that sense, you could say it's more black and white, because what makes it logical or rational is the fact that there are no feelings or evaluations involved. It's just, do the parts work together? Do they fit together? Do they connect? And it's very denotative. It's very focused on what is going on, what is the thing, whereas feeling is about morality or value judgments about that thing. And so by necessity, you kind of find more, or you could say there's more of a grayscale there because it's more wishy-washy, or not wishy-washy, but mishy-mushy, as it were. How can we truly know our MBTI type if we do not normally exercise our rationality, i.e., working with intuitive principles consistently? It seems that in order for one to identify with a specific cognitive stack, he must already have experience with notions that appeal to the core of each function. Interesting. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the question. The one side of my face is dark. I look like Kylo Ren. Let me see if I can... Just trying to help make it so that I'm not quite so... Maybe that'll help. Yeah. Okay, I'm back. Well, I still look like Kylo Ren. That's okay. Trying to remember what the question was. Yeah, I'm struggling to figure out quite what. It seems that in order for one to identify with a specific cognitive stack, he must already have experience with notions that appeal to the core of each function. So I think I know what you're saying. I guess part of the problem is that I always think of the functions as like a filter. So it's about, and this is an IDRLabs notion, that it's all about the way in which you think about things and not about the actual content. It's only about the content insofar as certain kinds of content tend to be colored in certain, things tend to be colored in certain ways by the method that you use them. Hence why you find, a lot of NI dominants or INTJs may tend to focus on saying similar things, not because that's necessary to being an INTJ, but because that just, given a certain society, that just tends to happen because of the way that the concepts link together. So I mean, you must already have experience with notions that appeal So yeah, I guess I see it. I think you're hitting on a part of the problem with testing for people, or testing for a person's type through a questionnaire, not through the facial expressions, is you have to rely on a person's own understanding of their own personality, but also you're relying on the fact that they will understand what you are referring to when they talk about your personality. So what I mean by that is that you actually do understand intuitively what feeling means as a function or what judging means as a function, and that has to be aligned in order for you two to actually communicate. So I don't know if that actually answers the question. I might have to come back to that because I'm just trying to figure it out. But um, oh, and let's see here. Okay, yeah. I am always trying to type people I know, but it's really hard. It is. Do you have any tips? I have watched all your type videos and found them super helpful, but I'm still having a lot of difficulties. Well, I'm glad you found them helpful. I feel your pain, though. I know it's the struggle. Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think. I have given some tips. One thing I would say is that's important is having the right attitude towards um, what precisely you're doing when you are typing them. So, because for me, what I'm focused on obviously is I want to know what are kind of the underlying philosophies that are or underlying impulses that guide their philosophies, or however you want to put it. Um, so I know that's what I'm looking for. Part of the problem is that it also, I think, in the end, it will always end up being a tentative assessment. I don't know if you can ever get the. I hesitate to say whether or not you can get the certainty that people seem to often want from it, and that's a problem that all of psychology deals with, because once again, you can't telepathically get into the other person's mind and experience things the way that they are experiencing them to confirm whether or not what you think is going on in their head and what is actually going on in their head are actually aligned. And that's a part of why it's hard. So, if anything, it does help. So, I guess if I could give some advice, make sure that you have clear definitions of what you're looking for. In terms of the functions or the function axes, make sure that you know this is what I'm looking for, and these are the criteria that are going to demonstrate that for me. At least that's one way of looking at it. Now, I'm being a little bit hypocritical saying that, because honestly, when I type people, it's much more, well, not when I naturally tend to type people, and if I'm ever to try to explain why I've typed a person, then I need to go back to this is what the functions are, this is what I've determined to be the reliable external indicator for those functions, etc. So, but when I'm just kind of typing people naturally in my own head, it is generally much more intuitive, which is I have in my mind different types, and I kind of compare them with the image of to see how they fit into the types or into the axes or whatnot. But if I'm ever to try to make that more official, then I have to pound it down. The problem is I don't know if I really have any good advice at this point. I would need to really sit down and maybe revamp those original videos I did. But yeah, I mean, don't get discouraged. And also, I do think it helps that because I think it takes time, and it takes time becoming acquainted to them. there's another question later on here that I remember that I'll go ahead and answer now, which is, have you ever been around a person for a long period of time and not been able to type them? And yes, many, many times. I had one friend who I struggled because the type that I thought at first for him just didn't really quite seem to fit, and I never quite felt like it until it was just one day I was looking into the ISTP type, and that's when suddenly it clicked, and I was like, oh, the notion I had in my head of what the ISTP actually looks like or how they act or whatnot is actually rather different from what ISTPs in the wild tend to look like. And there's these elements to it that, like the sense of humor or the way that they talked, that I hadn't quite realized, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is more of what it looks like, and I linked it up with my friend, and then I was from there able to start saying, and that's why he's doing this. This fits much better. His sense of humor fits much better in this model than in the other one, and so forth. So I would say that if you're really struggling to type someone, it might be, because I think a lot of the troubles that people have with typing people really have more to do with the fact that it just doesn't feel right that they're in a particular category. And it really has a lot more to do with the feelings and instincts involved that, and that's why people react rather vehemently, I think, to, me or somebody else typing a person in a specific way. Because it's like, but that's not what that type is, in their mind. That's not my intuitive vision of what that type is. Like, how could you think they're that way? Like, that's not what they are. That doesn't explain them how it does. And I'm still working out the details of kind of how to deal with this, but I think it helps to recognize that, and then to say, if you're struggling to type someone, it may be because either you have an incorrect view of what that person's really like, or you have an incorrect view of the type that you're trying to type them as. Like with me and my friend, who I realized was actually best described by ISTP. Beforehand, the view that I had in my mind of what ISTPs are was not a very useful category, because very, very few people are actually like that. But then I realized that there's this whole, it came through my doing the revisiting the types, because for those videos I spent a lot of time watching videos of, people who either were typed as or typed themselves as, or who I could determine to be ISTP, so I could try to get a feel for it. And that's when I suddenly realized that dispelled the last of the myths that I feel like I kind of had in my head, that the ISTP is like always silent and never speaks and has no facial expressions, which is completely bogus. That's not the case at all. Sometimes it is, but it's and I'd still had elements of that in my mind, and that was really what was actually holding me back. I had thought that I was above that, but I think part of the reason I struggled to type my friend was because those stereotypes were still kind of there, holding me back from seeing that what an ISTP really is like fits my friend very well. There might be problems with the advice I've just given. I tend to backtrack on what I'm saying, but so I'm afraid I don't have any good secret tips, that will make it super, super easy, because people aren't simple as far as their cognition goes, and people conceal themselves, or they have elements that are idiosyncratic to their type, but I don't despair if, at the beginning you struggle to, you feel like you are in this limbo state where you're not sure what type they are, and you're like, well, they might be this, but that just doesn't feel right, and you're in there for a while, but then finally you learn something about a particular type, and you're like, oh, and then it falls more into place. I feel like that's what's happened a lot with me. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let's see. Oh, we have a I'm going to pick a couple of questions. So yeah, let me go ahead and address just generally. There's a few questions here that are from the same person, but they all relate to the essential question of why do I type myself as INFJ? So I've talked a little bit about this at this point. But one of the probably the most common typing that people have posted, I don't want to say against me, but have said, I think that you're actually INTP. I know why that is, or I see why that is. But why do I think that I am INFJ? Well, for a lot of the reasons I've been saying, as I understand NI and SE, I believe that that is what I demonstrate much more in the way that I think about things. And I find myself drawn much more to that. But more importantly, it explains what I tend to do. I know that I come off as scatterbrained. I think that though that was, I don't know if scatterbrained is, I think scatterbrained is a good description of NE from the perspective of NI, but I don't know if I feel like NI can seem, quote, scatterbrained. It depends on how you define scatterbrained ultimately. So I know very, very clearly that I see very clearly the FE and the TI in me. I relate very, very well to the notion of orienting myself in terms of what I perceive other people's values to be, and sort of having that notion of that conception of what selflessness is and what morality is, of it having a lot to do with orienting myself properly in relation to other people's values that they're holding, rather than this more contextual vision of I need to determine, I need to not worry about that so much and focus on what is right for me. I don't have that more contextual judgment. I just don't think. In fact, I don't express it in videos because I'm trying to be objective, but if we're talking about my own prejudices that I know are there and I just try to acknowledge and handle, I actually have some very strong frustrations with TEFI, which I've noticed. Stronger than with NESI, although that will sometimes annoy me as well. And that's probably one of the biggest indicators, is how much I've found I have struggled to describe those functions and those axes, and how, as I've come to learn them more, I've felt in myself like a rebellion against them. Like, how could you think this way? But like, I know that it's legitimate and there's problems with how I think. I know that I tend to I get fixated on this is the central idea and this is what I'm going to communicate. Like I've said many times, that is part of the beta quadra, I think. But you know, as time goes on and my context changes, the central idea that I'm trying to communicate also alters. I think that was right for me to say that. Anyway, I guess that's sort of the best I can do right now. I'm trying to think of, a lot of it is just, it makes so much sense, and I look at the INTP type, I look at what their functions are supposed to be, and I'm just kind of like, and I'm not talking about the INTP like descriptions of them, I'm talking about the functions, because the descriptions, I could see myself fitting a number of them, but looking at what the functions are supposed to be and what the philosophical attitudes are behind them, while there are elements I understand ultimately, if I were to start saying that, oh, I was wrong, I'm really an INTP, that would be very incorrect of me to do that, or almost dishonest, because that would literally just be me saying, well, acknowledging that I look like an INTP, but there's a whole lot more to type than what you externally look like, or that you sort of could pass yourself off as this type. It's more about how you really feel about the functions and the function axes and the philosophies behind them, I think, anyway. And as far as those things go, I relate much more, not just relate, I tend to agree much more with the INFJ ones. And I don't with the others. So how do I deal with blind TE? I don't. Haha, next question. Just kidding. Well, I've mentioned it a little bit before. TE has a lot to do with the external results, and as I've mentioned before in sort of my attitudes towards I have a prejudice against, and that's why I use the word prejudice. Because that's what it is. It's a prejudice against something is more real or existent because there are greater external results, or something is right because it's effective, or that there's data. Because I just naturally am very, very skeptical whenever I hear that there has been a study done on something, or that there's statistics on something, or that there's percentages, or really whenever we start getting quantitative, I start getting rather skeptical, because I want there to be qualitative differences that transcend the measurements and make it, because measurement just feels so wishy-washy and it changes all the time. And the data changes all the time, and I want something that's more clear and straightforward. Also, there's definitely there's a pushback in me against, I have never really found the notion of like clearly delineating, here is the goal I want to get towards, and here's how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to record my progress every day in very clear steps. I'm going to have someone that I'm accountable to, and I'm going to make clear scholarly reports of my progress, and I'm going to measure my progress, and thereby I will know that I have achieved my goal. And I know that that works and is very, very helpful for other people, but personally, I cannot stand it. I do not find that helpful. I have never found it helpful, and I will never find it helpful. I cannot stand doing that. I cannot stand to measure myself that way, and it has never helped, because I just don't operate that way. I don't isolate goals like that. What I do is I decide that I want to do a thing, and then I do it. And however long it takes, or I make the judicious decision halfway through that, you know what, this just isn't really worth it for me to keep doing. But if there's anything that I can't stand, it's the notion that, you could say, I don't know, I had a friend who they were going through, they had a parent who I believe was an ESTJ, but at least was TE dominant, and therefore wanted to measure everything. So this friend of mine was trying to overcome anxiety and some other things, and trying to overcome the occurrence of panic attacks and other things that were very disruptive to their life. And the parent was trying to help solve this problem by saying, well, let's put down the goal, the official TE goal of eliminate the panic attacks. Great. Now we're going to isolate the techniques you're going to use, and you're going to keep a journal every day that's going to record the progress that you make towards eliminating your stress. And I'm over in the corner like ripping my hair out. Like, that's why I don't have as much hair, because I ripped it out. I'm like, what are you doing? I can't stand it. But I know that there are people who that's how that helps. It provides order. It allows them, because that allows them to really feel like stuff is happening, and stuff is happening. I shouldn't say that they're just feeling it. But by golly, I don't I don't think like that, and I don't find that useful, and I'm not doing a good job of explaining why, but anyway, that's so I like I said, I don't really deal with it. I kind of have a prejudice, and I find that whenever I'm being asked to if I should put it this way, if I am ever asked or feel like I am expected, which I often do, feel like I am expected to produce results, then it's very all or nothing. It's either I say I'm not going to do this, or I give them results like they wouldn't believe, or I strive for that. I know that that is a tendency of mine, but I feel like that almost is more of a demonstration of SE, inferior SE, but SE and TE, like I said, have a lot of relationships with each other. But I have noticed that if I feel threatened, or I feel like I need to impress someone with, my prowess in all aspects of life, and I therefore will focus on TE because I know I'm not as good at that, of, coming up with a quantity of facts or of external results. But when I do need to do that, I feel so, I have noted that I feel so inadequate in that area that I will very naturally try to overcompensate. Or I shouldn't say overcompensate. In my mind, it's like I was kind of doing it with the first couple of Jesus personality podcasts, where I'm like, okay, I'm entering into the realm of translating Greek. I really need to provide a lot of data to demonstrate that I know what or at least that this is a plausible interpretation. And I need to sort through all of the avenues, and I just kind of entered into this mode. And I'll sometimes do it when I'm nervous about something, where I'll be like, I need to make sure that this is the tightest ship ever, because I'm not good with TE, and therefore I need to make sure that I look and find and as a result, it will come off as ultra, that ultra aspect of TE. Similar thing I think happens when I'm threatened and have to make in my imagination, I have to make a decision of what to do. Or that's not quite. In that ultra risk game, I built up this huge army, and I wasn't going to attack anybody until I built up this giant navy. It was also because I wasn't attacking anyone and no one was attacking me, so I could just keep on building units. And I amassed this giant army, and that's actually often how I prefer to play. It makes things simple, because if I just have more troops than you, then I'll just crush you, and then I don't have to do all these calculations. But it's like, if I'm going to do that, then I've got to make sure that there is no possibility that you will be able to fight back. So I don't know if that quite answers it, but I think it's very black and white. I am skipping over a few questions because I feel like I've answered them already. Like, for instance, practical uses of MBTI for me. I've talked about how it's helped a bit with the family, though it always is more of a matter of, and this actually fits very nicely in with blind TI, because I think that is an expression of blind TI. I don't naturally think in terms of how can I use this to accomplish such and such a goal. I don't think in terms of that. I'm always thinking in terms of I just want to understand the system and understand what the system is, how does it fit together, and what are the pure terms. I'm never thinking in terms of positing a goal. Goals only come into the picture when, say, I'm going to make a video. Here's what I want to make, and then I work towards it, fine. But when it comes to knowledge, it's not contextual. It's not about this is what I want, therefore this is what is important for me to know in order to accomplish that. That's very TE. And I'm not like that. You could say in socionics that I'm blind to that. So therefore, I actually tend to balk, or I don't think balk is the right word. But I hold back when it comes to the practical uses, because, or what you describe as practical, because I'm not. That to me says practical means you're trying to accomplish something, and I'm generally trying to learn MBTI just so I can learn it, and I find that having the information itself is itself useful. However, despite that, I think that the most useful area I've found it has been in simply recognizing that other people, what it really means when I say that other people think differently than me, and like to really appreciate that, and that allows me to be much more patient with other people. But also, I think it has helped with my brother, with learning that what I really need to do is not maintain a harmony so much as just simply become more contextual and focus on what just to express myself completely genuinely, and to try my hardest to not continually try to reposition or orient myself in terms of what he's doing, but to just simply do my thing, and then he feels more comfortable. But that's a rare occurrence. I think you can certainly do those things, but I don't know if I'm the best person to go to for advice for it, I found, because I get so nervous, because I'm always afraid that the practical advice that I give will lead somebody astray. Like it won't actually allow them to accomplish the goal. And I don't want to find myself held responsible for that. So I'm always wary of entering that, because I get nervous about, that area. I kind of try to be hands off, and I don't know, if that's good, bad. However, I think it has its bad parts. So I'm going to go I'm going to go till up to the 4-hour mark, I think is what I'm going to do. I'm going to hop a little bit around to questions that I think will be of most interest to people, but I do want to, eventually I want to be able to answer all of them. I'll figure out precisely how I want to do that, but I'm going to go down a little bit. Well, I don't know. Because the next question is, what are your thoughts on a little bit of personality.com? I don't have a whole lot of thoughts. I did check that website out. I think they do a good job of explaining things. I think they have a very nice looking website. Sorry. I mean, it's kind of like, I did look at their definitions of the cognitive functions. I mean, if you're looking for my initial thoughts, it's really more of a matter, for me, it's a matter of taste. I like it when things aren't, I prefer things that aren't trying to simplify themselves on my behalf. I like it when things are clear and consistent and thereby concise. But I don't want them to hide things from me or to try to simplify things. And I felt like that's what they were doing, because they're a lot smarter than me, because I don't really do that. And it prevents me from reaching a wider audience, and I knew that, and I know that, but that's what I feel comfortable with. So they're reaching a wider audience, and I might be oversimplifying their technique, but so anyway. Also, next one, have I considered giving a critique of other MBTI enthusiasts in like a positive way? I have thought about that, and I've kind of been doing that in this video. I generally avoid that though, because I guess you could say I'm kind of Jeffersonian. I don't like conflict or confrontation. I don't do well with it, because I struggle, because I orient myself, like I've said, in terms of what other people's what I perceive other people's feelings to be and what their values are, and I'm trying to find a democratic compromise. But it's hard sometimes because I often do have very strong feelings. But I'm trying to, but the problem is that they're feelings, they're not reasons. And there's a very important difference. And so I've been trying to be honest and open, but in my mind that includes me saying, listen, this is a prejudice of mine, or this is a feeling. I don't have any good reasons behind it, but I also do recognize that I have this feeling, or I have this mistrust. But please don't feel bad about it, because like, it's just mine. I'm being subjective. So, but yeah, that's not really quite the kind of thing. I prefer to just say what I'm thinking. But I guess in some sense I've sort of been providing a critique. In you know, so. What are the types that you find require a bit more effort on your side to work with? How do you befriend them in general? Probably anybody. I don't know. It does depend on the person, and it depends on the situation, and what it is that we actually have to get done. Though probably I've found trouble with STJs, particularly ESTJs, which socionics, it's kind of like, well, that's no surprise. Um, yeah, 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 because I don't, I have, we just struggle to really connect. But I wouldn't say we're not able to work together. I think we're able to, but then again, yeah, actually, no, I don't think we can. Like, I think it's good, I think, to have, if, so for instance, if you're going to have, like, excuse me, if you're going to have, like, two people who are, like, counseling you, or, like, giving you advice, and then you make the decision, I think it's often good to have two types who are in a socionics conflict, because then you are assured that you're going to get two people who come from totally different ends of the Myers-Briggs or the Jungian spectrum. You're going to get two very different people, and that's actually the case in a church function that I'm involved with. Is that I serve to a certain capacity as a counselor with somebody else who is an opposite temperament to me, and I've seen that that's actually very beneficial, because given that we're both polite to each other, we both respect each other, given those two things, it's therefore very helpful that we're of these different temperaments, because we're so vastly different, because we're able to speak on things that the other may not know enough about, and also offer truly competing views, so that the person who we're assisting in making decisions can get a full view of the picture. But anyway, going back to the question, what are the types that so I would probably say them, if I had to choose a type. There has, interestingly, I do think I've also had a bit of trouble with ESTPs, despite the fact they're supposed to be the dual. I think I get along better with ESTPs, though they also tend to intimidate me a bit. And I tend to get a little bit defensive or standoffish because they're so present, and they're so straightforward. So far, they tend to like me a lot, though, so that's good. But I do tend to so that can make it a bit difficult, because I feel almost a little bit overwhelmed, or kind of like, okay, you're going, I'll just let you go. How do I maintain good relationships with ESFPs? It's not terribly hard for me, actually. I like ESFPs. I've gotten along pretty well with a number of ESFPs. Actually, one of my first crushes in high school was an ESFP. Lovely gal. I generally have done very well with ESFPs, better than with ESTPs, which is interesting. I'm not sure quite why that is, but I'm thinking of a couple of people, and we're very different. Like, we're very, very different, but it's like the differences sort of, for whatever reason, tend to delight the other party in weird ways. And so it's kind of like we're able to mutually poke fun at. And I think it's also been helpful because the ESFP never tries to overstep my boundaries, even though they do like the idea of trying to get this sort of shelled in INFJ to have more fun. And it's like, but they never actually overstep. So far, anyway. I haven't met any that have been who have been like that. We've generally gotten along. So, but how do you maintain those relationships? I don't know if I really could answer that question because it's just sort of happened for me. But probably just be real with them. But the ones who I've met have been so gregarious that it's almost like, how do you mess up a relationship with them? Like, I know I'm being very facetious, but I guess that's my position. And I've answered that question. Do I believe in moral objectivity? Yeah. I mean, that'll probably, well, you did laugh at the end, so I don't know if you actually intend for me to answer that. I mean, yes. But I mean, the only reason I feel the need to qualify that is because I think a lot of people get confused or wrong about what the moral objectivity is supposed to mean, like in practice. Because it's like, well, once you buy into the notion of, I don't want to say buy in, but if you are operating on a notion of moral objectivity, like in the way that I think beta types often are wont to do, as opposed to delta types, like the STJ and NFP, for a beta type, it's kind of like, well, objective truth means this is the truth that eventually everybody will come to recognize as the truth. And I don't think that's how the NFP and STJ types view it. So it's it's also something that could very easily be used as a tool to try to control people, which I think is like the worst thing in the world that you could do is try to use morality to break somebody else. There's a special circle in hell for that. Precisely because I think there is an objective morality, but you had better darn be using it properly, or not using it, but regarding it properly and also being meek about it, because that's probably the other thing, is it's like, if I say that there's an objective morality, I don't want the assumption to be that by saying that, I'm saying that I know it for sure in all situations. And I'm pretty sure no one's assuming that. Because obviously, it's more of a matter of, well, no, it's just that I think there's actually something that I should be looking for, and I should be striving for, and take as my cue. But I don't know. I almost hesitate to answer that question because I don't know if I don't even really think in terms of that. I guess I kind of think more in terms of the primitive version of, I just sort of do stuff, and if it's good, then I do it, and if it's bad, then I don't do it. But or I reevaluate what I define as good or bad. And so I suppose that's moral objectivity, but let's see here. Have I ever tried to change my MBTI? Like, have I ever had a stereotypical behavior? So, yeah. No, I've never tried to change my type, but I have certainly tried to change ways that I have expressed my type. I don't think that, I think I've said before that I'm not, when people say, why can't I change my type, I think really what they mean is, why can't I change the way that I behave? And of course you can change the way you behave. You can change the way you think. You can change all of that. You can change anything that you can get a grips on, but I don't think that you can change your personality any more than you can just change, any more than you can change the fact that you're human, or that you can change all of the neural wiring in your brain. You can change some of it, or so I'm told, but there's so much in there, and some of that stuff is just sort of rigidly in there. But the thing is that I don't think that that governs how you act, that it has to. Maybe I should take out the changing the neural wiring example, because it gets fuzzy there. But I think that you can, I can change what behaviors I do, but I mean, I just change those the way that I change anything else, which is that I recognize what the thing is, and then I decide to not do it. I feel like my answer to these later questions, I must be getting tired or something, because I don't feel like they're as good, but maybe I'm just being oversensitive. I would say that so for instance, I've noticed that there are certain behaviors that I think are more stereotypical to the INFJ, but I'm thinking of, like, IDRLabs has pointed out, sort of indirectly from the people they've typed as INFJ, that you can get people who, you can get that almost, you get that spirituality combined with singularity of vision that, is a recipe for making, like, a cult or something. I'm being facetious, but that's why I like Wittgenstein so much, because I believe that, yeah, he's an INFJ, but he's an INFJ who was really striving to combat some of the typical things that arise from INFJs, just like you might combat any problem that you might find you have more of a propensity for. So with Wittgenstein, he strove to eliminate from himself every bit of error or fraud. He was trying to, and I really resonate with that, because I'm continually striving to not do what I think the stereotypical INFJ is supposed to do, where I give little white lies, or I'm disingenuous, or things like that, even though I know that I have very much the capacity and even the tendency to do that. I strive with all of my might to fight against that, because I don't want to be that way. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm INFJ. It just means that I've become a more healthy INFJ, if you will. As for how to do that, like I've said, my TE's blind, so I don't know. Next question. Any thoughts on incorporating typology with the education system? Haven't the faintest idea. I actually am serious, though. And honestly, I do consider that falling under my problem with dealing with the more TE questions of, like, how do I actually implement the typology? And that's a major flaw that I have, that maybe I could work on more, but that I do struggle to figure out practical applications. And by that, I simply mean accomplishing certain goals, right? Of saying, okay, how do you practically implement this into the education system? And I'm kind of like, I mean, I could certainly try to do that, but I would just be so terrified that my plan would be too much of an idealist thing. Like Plato's Republic, right? Like, no one should ever make Plato's Republic. I think there's some great ideas, like interesting ideas in there. Actually, more than just interesting. I think there's some profound, great ideas in there, but no one should ever make the Republic. don't do that, because he is not a practical thinker. He's like me. He's dealing with ideals and with these ideas, and that's very important. We need people who do that, but you need someone who's more TE oriented to figure out how to actually incorporate that. I would think anyway. So, what is one recent video or project of yours that you feel satisfied with? I often struggle with this because often after I've made a video, within a couple of months, I feel somewhat unsatisfied with the video. And that's part of what I've been talking about with the NISE contextuality thing, because after a few months, things have changed, and now I've sort of redefined what I'm focusing on, and now it's like, well, now I need to make a new video that, sort of perfectly encapsulates this new version of the idea. But anyway, but nevertheless, at the same time, I also do feel satisfied with all my videos, insofar as I do feel like I've done the best job I could in almost all of them to encapsulate and communicate the central idea that I wanted to, or the points that I wanted to. So it goes back and forth. Though I will say, and this answers a question that someone else asks later on, I don't know how many of you know about the starry laughter thing that I did, that experimental thing. I'm actually very satisfied with that. I know it's very strange. It's not for everybody, but it's something that I wanted to try. I'd been working on, and oddly enough, even though it's not like the greatest thing ever, or even necessarily the best videos I've made, if I were to pick something that I was satisfied with, I feel actually very satisfied with that for the most part. I'm not quite sure why, but probably because I feel like I like that. I feel like that's something that it's personal, it's more artistic, and I actually feel like the stuff I did with Starry Laughter is a better representation of my own inner life and the way that I actually think about things than the typology. The typology is almost more like, that's an insight into, I'm thinking very logically and technically. With the Starry Laughter, that's more of my literary impulse, and I think my rather more deep and fundamental literary impulse kind of trying to come out. Whether it's successful or not is up to you. Those are, compared to my satisfaction with them, those are still very low in the view range, which I expected, because people know the channel for typology, and they're not coming for weird philosophical explorations. What is one of the things you have learned about yourself in your YouTube venture? I'm going to have to pass over that, because I'm going to be here for another few hours if I try to answer that one. And I'm going to be getting off in 15 minutes, because actually my throat is going to be going out soon. I'm going to keep trucking along. Needless to say, I have learned a lot. I've learned an immense amount. I can't track down everything. I've learned things about how to use the technology, obviously, but I've also learned about, it's taught me how, I've learned about typology through teaching it. And a lot of my breakthroughs have come through me forcing myself to have to write down in a way that other people will be able, hopefully, to understand my insights, and that opens up new avenues and all these kinds of things. That comes through that. It's also taught me about people. It's taught me about what I might want to do for a career. It's taught me so much stuff. I mean, it's been like a secondary university education. Am I interested in other aspects of Jung or Jungian typology apart from Jung? typology. Yeah, I think I'm interested in all of it. I focus on the typology, but I am sort of, I'm interested in it in the same way I'm interested in psychology. But I don't, for whatever reason, I don't have the same drive with, say, the archetypes, at least not right now, to go through and really systematically categorize and figure out what is going on. Though now that I talk about it, I'm starting to get that urge. So you might be seeing a video in the future about the archetypes, but that I need to do a lot more research on that. So the answer is yes, but I have focused more on the typology, so I don't, I couldn't pick any specific thing out. I feel like as kind of a total thing, it's all very interesting because he touched on so many different things. Have I considered writing a book? You have no idea. I'm actually writing a book right now on typology, but IDRLabs is as well, and they are a lot farther along than me, and they are hopefully going to be releasing. I have some I have some essays or content that will be in that book. They've been working on it for a while. They will hopefully have it out this year. There's been some delays, unfortunately, but as for me, I actually have striven to write a number of books. I haven't finished anything, but they've been a lot of very good practice. I do very much want to eventually release. I want it to be a thin book, concise, something that you could just kind of carry around in your backpack easy, something that would be self-published, like maybe through Amazon or a service like that, that you could get as an ebook. Money is not the concern for me. I don't care about making money off of it. I just want to put out a book because I find that a very nice medium for some of the way that I want to present insights in this codified way. So yes, I have very much considered writing a book. I'm working on writing a book. In some sense, you have seen some of the fruits of my writing that book in, say, the Axes and Quadras video, because that was me extrapolating from certain insights that came to me through the process of having to write the book. The book would be basically me, once again, trying to codify all of the things that I've talked about through typology and get it so that it's all in a nice little system. It'd be a thin book. I would lead all the way up to talking about each of the types and then some other things with typology. But so that's what I have to say about that at the moment. Why are most websites having to do with socionics so darn colorless and drab? Haven't the faintest idea. I don't know. Well, I could guess that it's because socionics has much more of a base in Eastern Europe, and I don't think Eastern Europe, speaking as an ignorant Westerner, I think that just as a cultural thing, they don't care nearly as much, if at all, about making things look pretty. I don't think. So things tend to... I also think that part of the problem is those are websites that are being translated into English, or the information is being translated into English. And so there's more of a focus on the translation than on the organization. But I don't know. I also think that they kind of don't like the Myers-Briggs notion of trying to sell the personality test to people. The socionics is much more... they don't like selling the types, as anyone could tell you. And if they are trying to sell the types, they're doing a horrible job of it because they're trying to be very objective and not sugarcoat anything in their view. So those are some of the reasons. They're not trying to sugarcoat anything. I think that's just also a thing that you see with more of Eastern Europe. That's what I would say or think anyway. Excuse me. Let me look one more time at the chat that I have been Yes, yes, this is still going, but I'm thinking I'm going to sign off. Yes. So this was an experiment. I know that some of you guys came in long after I tried to explain. I apologize, I haven't really been looking at the chat. This was sort of an experiment. I didn't quite know how it would go. So if one thing I've learned is that I need to learn a better way for me to interact with the chat, because that's sort of part of the, that's clearly an important part of having something being, having a live stream at all. So my mind's going all over. So I'm going to try to figure that out. I am going to try what I'm thinking I'm going to do. I will let you guys know in another video. I think I'm going to need to take a break from live streaming for for at least a week or so, so that I can get my voice back. But this was an experiment. I hope you enjoyed it. I do feel bad because part of, I think, a live stream is you're supposed to, you know, interact a little more directly with the audience, and I deliberately muted the chat because I was finding I just couldn't focus on what I was saying when the chat was up. So I was trying to deal with that by having all the questions be posted beforehand on the one video, but I don't think that's normally how people do question answers. So anyway, I apologize if I haven't gotten to your question yet. I'm going to try probably in another live stream for consistency's sake. I would hate to have said, I'll answer this live, and then just answered in a comment. So, but I mean, I do know that it will have been weeks and weeks since then, but my voice is just starting to go. And I also should probably get something to eat, and it's been 4 hours, so anyway. I really appreciate you guys being here. I mean, thanks for listening to me ramble on. I hope it was helpful. And like I said, I'll let you know in another video what I'm going to do about the second half. But do you have any other social media to notify us of these? Not really. YouTube's really the main thing, but if it helps, I'll try to make it I don't know if that was a joke free again, because if you just arrived, you might have missed the whole live stream. But but hopefully it should be processing this and just putting it up. So anyway, I hope it was useful to you. No, I will not make a Twitter. Never. I will never descend. No, not descend. That was condescending. But anyway, I'm afraid I'll have to be putting it up via the YouTubes through various methods. But I'll try to. If there was any problem with realizing I was doing this, sorry about that. Okay, I am going to end the live stream soon. Thank you again. Sorry for my that I'm all over the place. My mind is split and it struggles with that, but oh, you guys are great. I guess I'm going to go ahead and end this if I can figure out how to do it. This is like the most awkward end to it ever. But thank you guys so much for your patience and for your kind words, for the questions you've asked. And thank you. I hope this was helpful. So good on ya. All right. I think you end it this way. Are you okay to Are you okay to stop the streaming? Yes, I'm ending it all. Goodbye, everybody.